because they had already be safer. And they were their due process because no one denied the January 6th insurrectionists of their call due. Let's be real, and the other folk.
As congressional members.
Up January 6th. They don't actually care about law and order and the rule of law. They're here today for one reason: to forfeit their constitutional oversight responsibilities. But since I decided to bring up January 6th, let me run a tape to remind y'all of the difference of congressional oversight versus criminals.
Conducting an oversight visit, which we had the power to do as congressional members. Statutory authority, and so that is what we're here for, and we're waiting to speak to a supervisor to let us in here because
Stand up for our mayor. We will be your eyes and your ears. And we will report to you, Mayor. Yes,
it's interesting that one set of behavior somehow is going to get a family rich overnight. And the other folk that were there in that video, the members of Congress, well, they're saying arrest them. Let me remind you that those January 6ers have been pardoned. Let me remind you that yet another January 6er was just arrested a few days ago for committing what? Another crime. So if we're going to talk about us keeping our streets safe, let's be real about who's causing crimes, who actually went through what we call due process, because no one denied the January 6th insurrectionists of their due process. They went to court, they either pled guilty or were found guilty, and they were sent to prison, and half of them, actually all of them, if their sentences said so, should still be in prison. Because we as Americans would be safer. We won't get into the fact that another one was already in trouble because they had already killed somebody. But I'll continue on. Right now, our Republican colleagues want to forfeit their constitutional oversight responsibilities. Let's talk about what's actually happening. In March, we learned that the Trump administration was dismantling the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and terminating staff at the Office of the Citizenship and Immigration Services Ombudsman. And in the Office of Immigration Detention Ombudsman, because they argue, quote, these offices have obstructed immigration enforcement and, quote, undermined DHS's mission. The Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties investigates public complaints about possible violations of civil rights and civil liberties in DHS activities, including immigration enforcement and discrimination. And in the Immigration Detention Ombudsman's it is their primary responsibility to conduct oversight on conditions at immigration detention centers. So why would the Trump administration want to dismantle offices tasked with conducting oversight of immigration enforcement and detention facilities? The simple answer is, without them, there will be no internal oversight offices to assess the legality of the Trump administration's policies on immigration enforcement.
So what have the results been? Since Trump took office on January 20th, 9 detainees have died in ICE custody. In fact, in Trump's first month in office, more detainees died in ICE custody than at any time since fiscal year 2020. Congressional Democrats have engaged in oversight activities of immigration facilities across the country, from Florida, where a 44-year-old Haitian woman died in ICE custody, to Newark, New Jersey, where 3 of our Democratic colleagues visited an immigration detention facility to ensure the humane treatment of detainees. This wasn't about going in and breaking nobody out, y'all, especially when there were cameras rolling everywhere. That's not what they were there to do. Now, in a breathtaking act of executive obstruction of congressional oversight and the unprecedented weaponization of the Department of Justice, we have an interim U.S. Attorney for New Jersey who for years has argued in court that Donald Trump is above the law. She has announced criminal charges against Congresswoman McIver for, quote, impeding and interfering with law enforcement. However, our power as members of Congress to conduct oversight is found in the Constitution and federal law. In fact, federal law explicitly prohibits DHS from, quote, preventing a member of Congress from entering for the purpose of conducting oversight any facility operated by or for the Department of Homeland Security used to detain or otherwise house aliens, or to make any temporary modification at any such facility that in any way alters what is observed by a visiting member of Congress. It is against the law. Full stop. Separately, the court has consistently held that the speech and debate clause of the Constitution protects individual members from prosecution for legislative acts, including, quote, fact-finding, field investigations, and information gathering. The court has consistently held that the primary purpose of the speech and debate clause is to, quote, prevent intimidation by the executive and before a possibly hostile judiciary. So let's call this for what it is. This administration is criminalizing legislative oversight, and the Republicans on this committee are helping them to do so. Rep. McIver didn't engage in interference. It was ICE that engaged in interference while members of Congress attempted to conduct legitimate oversight of ICE facilities. Everyone, whether you are American or not, should be deeply disturbed and worried about Trump's abuse of power. They're attacking universities for teaching things they don't like. They're attacking law firms for representing clients that they don't like. This hearing and these charges are an attempt at political intimidation. The three members in Newark were exercising their constitutional duties to check an out-of-control executive branch. This entire situation happened because of the unjust arrest of Mayor Baraka. And not only were the members invited in and given a tour of the facility, this was after they so-called had broken the law. Now, I don't know about y'all, but where I'm from in Texas, I can tell you that I'm not used to having law enforcement see a crime happen right in front of their faces and then say, never mind, we'll just go about our business. In fact, why don't you go ahead and come on in? Come on in, we gonna do this tour because, oops, we did make a mistake because technically by law, we are supposed to allow you in. And wait a minute, while you're here, do y'all want something to drink? We got refreshments for you as well. And then after you conduct this oversight, and you actually gave a clean bill of health because you were never there to disrupt, you were always there to do your duty. They came out and they said, everything looks good. And then it wasn't at that moment that they decided to arrest members. It wasn't the next day. In fact, even as I sit here today, no member has been arrested. Now you tell me how many times you can see the robber go in the bank, steal the money, and then they say, well, never mind, we'll think about this later. That is what you call politicizing. And that is what we are here to talk about is wrong. But we got a few other issues with ICE right now, so I'm gonna get to them in a second. The DOJ, as I said already, has already dropped the charges against the mayor. Look, they're coming after everyone who uses their constitutional rights and duties to speak truth to power. The press, the courts, and now members of Congress. And to be perfectly honest, I had my team do the research. Under no other president, Democrat or Republican, can we find an incident where they have tried to arrest members of Congress. This is absolutely absurd that they were out there simply doing
their duty. We have never seen ICE act in this way. In fact, it's not less oversight that we need right now, it's more. In fact, I'm gonna tell you, actually, I'm not gonna tell you. I can show you better than I can tell you. Roll the tape.
Shocking video showing the moment ICE agents smashed a car window and forcibly removed a man in New Bedford. 29-year-old Juan Francisco Mendez has no criminal record and was...
Stop, ma'am, stop.
Definitely a chaotic scene on Eureka Street Thursday as Worcester police and ICE agents detained a mother and her 16-year-old daughter. That girl's face slammed into the ground as she was taken into custody. They have not been identified. Worcester police said officers were dispatched to the area for a report of a federal agent surrounded by about 24 people. When police arrived, they say the teen daughter was...
Agents smashed his window and dragged him out while his small children cried in the back seat and his partner recorded the incident.
You can't tell me that somebody in this building shouldn't do their jobs because these people are out of control. You're talking about arresting members of Congress? These masked agents are running around acting this way? This is not okay. This shouldn't be about politics. We all should be on the same side saying we will not stand for this type of activity, but instead, they want to pretend like it's members of Congress that are the thugs. It's members of Congress that are the ones that are stoking this kind of violence. Let me tell you what those members of Congress were doing. They were trying to make sure that there would not be another mother that would lose her life in ICE custody as it was Mother's Day weekend. They decided that they just wanted to make sure that people were safe because that is who we are supposed to be in this country. And honestly, for anybody that considers themselves to be a Christian, they should care about treating people in a humane way. And they should also care about due process. Everyone in this country under our Constitution is due process. With that, I will yield.
Ranking member yields back. With that, I'll now recognize the chairman of the full committee, the whole committee, Chairman Jim Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's be clear. Republicans have been consistent. We've condemned violence every time it happened, whether it was last week in New Jersey, whether it was January 6th, whether it was the summer of 2020. Every single time we said if there's violence, it's wrong. Been nice if the other side had done the same thing. Summer of 2020, holy cow. Police being attacked all over the place. What are they doing? Raising money to bail out the bad guys while they're talking about defunding the police. So don't give me this that somehow we're being inconsistent. We have condemned it every single time. 4 years and 4 months ago today, January 20th, 2021, Joe Biden made 3 decisions that created this mess in our country that we've had to deal with. He said, we're no longer going to build a wall. We're no longer going to have remain in Mexico. And when you get here, you will not be detained. You will be released. Guess what? Everybody came. Go figure. 8 million people came into the country. 6 million people were released. Thank goodness for President Trump and his administration. Elected on this issue. And already his administration has deported over 135,000 criminal illegal aliens. CFPB and Coast Guard have seized 232,000 pounds of drugs at our southern border, and the FBI has arrested suspected MS-13 gang members, including high-ranking members in New York and Virginia. That's what enforcing our immigration laws looks like. That's what the president campaigned on, and he's doing exactly what he said. And it all happened without any help from the other side. Rather than seeking to protect the people they represent, they're fighting for criminal illegal aliens to stay in this country. Now think about this too. First it was sanctuary cities, local officials saying, we're not going to help ICE enforce federal law. Even when they get a detainer, they let them out of the jail when they're trying to come apprehend them. People have been in there. We had the situation in Denver where the illegal alien was in for auto theft, charged with auto theft, aggravated assault, and they said, we're not going to release him to ICE. ICE had sent a detainer saying, give us 48 hours, heads up. They gave him 40 minutes. They had to arrest the guy in the parking lot, and an ICE agent gets injured. They had to tase. It was bad for the migrant, bad for the law enforcement, endangers the public. But that's what left-wing policies do. Sanctuary cities, then it was sanctuary states, whole states, sanctuary states, and saying we're not going to work with federal law enforcement. Then it was judges letting the bad guy out the back door while the good guys are coming in the front door to arrest him. And now we find out it could even be members of Congress. That's what we saw at Delaney Hall a couple weeks ago. It wasn't congressional oversight. ICE is an important job to do, and God bless the men and women who serve in ICE. They got a tough job. I know we got some here been there. They got a hard job, and agitators who obstruct them from doing that part of their job are part of the problem. So I'm going to thank our witnesses for being here today. I want to thank the chairman for his good work in this subcommittee and on this issue in particular, and I yield back.
Chairman yields back, and I was remiss. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today as well. We appreciate you and your time. With that, I will yield to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Raskin, for his opening statement.
Thank you kindly, Chairman Van Drew, and for your opening statement. This week's events show how MAGA has turned American justice completely upside down and inside out. Over the last week, we've been talking about a single rogue DOJ employee who unilaterally canceled more than $500 million in Department of Justice grants to local law enforcement and victims' rights organizations and those assisting the victims of rape and sexual assault across the country. That's what right-wing policies do. I would say to my friend, the chair of the full committee, we tried to restore that money. Nobody seemed to know how any of this happened, but our colleagues didn't utter a word against our amendment, and yet they all voted against it. What else happened? Well, a 33-year-old January 6 rioter who assaulted our police officers at the Capitol, and he smashed the glass pane through which Ashley Babbitt climbed before she was fatally shot by a Capitol officer, was arrested again yesterday. This time they got him for burglarizing neighbors' homes. This was a guy who was pardoned by President Trump, now robbing houses in Virginia. This Zachary Alam was serving an 8-year sentence after a jury convicted him of 7 criminal felonies and 3 misdemeanors when President Trump granted him clemency as part of the mass pardon of 1,600 insurrectionists and rioters for the thousands of crimes committed on that day. At sentencing, U.S. District Court Judge Friedrich described the testimony of police who recalled Alam as, quote, by far the loudest, most combative, and most violent of the January 6 rioters who attacked the police in the part of the Capitol that these officers were defending. And yesterday, the Trump Department of Justice agreed to pay nearly $5 million to the family of Ashley Babbitt, the rioter who tried to storm the House Speaker's lobby on January 6 after she broke into the Capitol and after the aforementioned Mr. Alam broke that window. The Department of Justice originally took the position that her wrongful death lawsuit brought by her family was wholly without merit, no basis, and that Babbitt's civil rights had never been violated by the police, and that the police officer acted reasonably in defense of members of Congress and in defense of Vice President Pence. A Capitol Police investigation cleared the officer involved, saying his actions at the height of the riot, quote, potentially saved members and staff from serious injury and possible death from a large crowd of rioters who had forced their way into the Capitol, into the House chamber, where members and staff were steps away. In 2023, then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said, I think the police officer did his job. Now, although Trump's new attorney general is set to give $5 million to the rioter's family, Trump has not proposed to give a penny to the more than 140 police officers injured, wounded, hospitalized, disfigured, and or disabled in their violence, and nothing to their families. He's proposed no money payments to the bereaved family of Officer Brian Sicknick, an Army veteran with 2 tours abroad who died at age 42 here on January 7th, 2021. the very next day after being brutalized by rioters. The decision to give millions of dollars to the Babbitt family and nothing to the families of the police officers who defended this Capitol, who defended us, exacerbates the insult of Speaker Johnson's continuing refusal to hang a simple plaque in honor of the officers who defended the Capitol and the Congress and the Vice President. A plaque mandated by law and now more than 2 years overdue on the West Front of the Capitol. The Speaker's stubborn refusal to respect the law is craven submission to the executive branch, to Donald Trump, who wants to pretend that the rampaging mob that he sent to Congress was made up of patriotic heroes and that the people he pardoned were, quote, hostages and, quote, political prisoners. A hostage is someone who's been illegally abducted by a terrorist group like Hamas and held for a financial or political ransom. A political prisoner is someone like Alexei Navalny or Nelson Mandela, who's been imprisoned for ideological reasons, not for violently assaulting the police or engaging in seditious conspiracy or destroying federal property. But the administration's effort to create big news yesterday was Trump's acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey, a blatantly partisan prosecutor who has bragged about working to turn New Jersey red. Well, she announced her intention to indict our colleague, Congresswoman LaMonica McIver, on charges of assaulting, resisting, and obstructing law enforcement based on the now famous May 9th incident outside of Delaney Hall, an ICE detention facility in McIver's district, where she was conducting a scheduled oversight visit with other members of Congress, including our 80-year-old colleague, Bonnie Watson-Coleman, and the mayor of Newark. Well, Delaney Hall is operated by the private prison company GEO, a major Republican donor that gave $1 million to Make America Great Again, Inc., and has faced numerous lawsuits for its treatment of detainees and unsafe conditions. The members had a lawful right to be there and to investigate, and even after ICE initiated a scuffle to arrest the mayor of Newark on public property, the House members were let in to tour the facility to conduct nonviolent oversight, and the tour went smoothly. This indictment is a manifest fraud, clearly designed to distract America this week from the administration's savage and unpopular effort to strip 14 million Americans of their Medicaid and health coverage and 11 million Americans of Head Start, Meals on Wheels, and other nutritional assistance programs like SNAP. Representative McIver was, of course, executing one of the core duties of a member of Congress, oversight, pursuant to her precise statutory right to enter and visit an ICE facility. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that oversight is a central element of the legislative process, because if we can't research the facts on the ground, we don't know what laws to pass. This, for the Department of Justice to charge McIver with assault, is an outrage against the Constitution, which protects members of Congress from civil and criminal prosecution for performance of their core legislative duties. It is also a scandal in light of the DOJ's constant backing of cop-beating insurrectionists, including with the shocking policy that these pardons can even apply to criminal charges wholly unrelated to the events of January 6th, as well as the DOJ's jaw-dropping decision to fire more than a dozen senior criminal prosecutors simply because they had worked on the January 6th case. Yet now we've got colleagues who celebrate January 6th insurrectionists actually calling for prosecution of members of the House for doing their jobs. Representative Buddy Carter called our colleagues rioters. Representative Bishop actually said this was an insurrection. I didn't know that was in his vocabulary, but this was an insurrection, and he said it was a debacle worse than 9/11. No police officers or ICE agents were injured at Delaney Hall. No one died. No one had a heart attack like Officer Fanone did. There were no strokes. There were no broken jaws, no broken necks. Nobody was forced out of police work like Sergeant Gonell was. Yet we've got members of Congress who would gladly jettison the speech and debate clause, which protects all of us in our work. The First Amendment and the Article I powers of Congress to score a few cheap political points at the expense of their own colleagues. In Trump world, violent insurrectionists and cop-beating extremists are heroes. They're martyrs. They're patriots. Members of Congress performing oversight functions are criminals and insurrectionists. And veteran criminal prosecutors of January 6 felons are fired, so Donald Trump can continue to pander to his private militia of pardoned rioters and insurrectionists and a reserve army of extremists who've proven themselves willing to stand back and stand by. Let me show you what a real assault on police officers looks like. If you'd roll the tape. Mr. Chairman, if this is an oversight hearing on ICE and ICE believes a real assault took place in New Jersey, where are they? Why are they not present today? The star of the show is absent, and that, my friends, is no oversight. I yield back.
Ranking member of the full committee yields back. Without objection, Ms. Dove from California and Mr. Garcia from Illinois are permitted to participate in today's hearings for the purpose of questioning the witnesses if a member yields them time for that purpose, and that is true for both Republican and Democrat. With that being said, without objection, all opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witnesses. Mr. Andrew Arthur. Mr. Arthur is a resident fellow in Law and Policy at the Center for Immigration Studies. He previously served as an immigration judge for nearly 9 years, as a House staffer, including for this committee and with the Department of Justice. Mr. Charles Marino. Mr. Marino is a former senior law enforcement advisor at the Department of Homeland Security to then Secretary Janet Napolitano, and the founder and CEO of Sentinel, a security and intelligence advisory firm. He is an adjunct professor of national security at the University of South Carolina. Mr. Scott Makowski. Mr. Makowski is a retired law enforcement officer who served more than 24 years with what was then called the Immigration and Naturalization Services. Don't mean to date you. And U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. When he retired, Mr. Makowski was serving as the Deputy Director of ICE in the city of New York. Mr. Jason Hauser. Mr. Hauser previously served as Chief of Staff of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement from 2021 to 2023. Prior to that, he served as a senior advisor to the Commissioner at Customs and Border Protection, as an Assistant Director for Legislative Affairs, and as Deputy Chief of Staff at the Department of Homeland Security. We are going to begin by swearing you all in today. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. Mr. Arthur, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Van Drew, Ranking Member Crockett, Chairman Jordan, and Ranking Member Raskin, thank you for inviting me here today. In June, I'll mark my 33rd year of immigration practice. Many of the issues we'll discuss today have been constant during that period, though others are more novel. One constant is the power of the legislative branch to decide which foreign nationals should be admitted, which should be removed, and which should be detained. The executive branch is duty-bound to faithfully execute those laws, and until late, consistently did so. It was the refusal of the last administration to detain migrants whom it was required to remove, and its granting entry to those Congress expressly stated were inadmissible, that triggered the largest migration crisis in this country's history, and that facilitated the entry of nearly 8 million clearly inadmissible aliens, most of whom remain. Consequently, the center estimates roughly 15.4 million aliens subject to removal are in the United States today. Polls and post-election analysis indicate the 2024 election was a referendum on those policies, with the American people demanding the removal of those here illegally. The best proof of this support is the bipartisan passage of the Laken-Riley Act, the first law passed in this Congress, which constrained border and port releases, but more importantly, forced the executive to comply with Congress's criminal detention mandates. The Trump administration has responded with a three-pronged program to drive down the unauthorized population. One, a massive border security effort with Mexico's assistance. Two, high-profile operations to apprehend and detain criminal aliens in the interior. And three, encouraging those here illegally to self-deport. Many elected officials at the state, local, and federal levels have pushed back against interior enforcement, however. The Biden administration argued that strict enforcement impeded its efforts to advance, quote, equity for all, close quote, and many of the president's opponents appear to agree. They also argued that the means the administration is using to enforce the laws have created fear and disrupted communities. It's common for those wanted by the authorities to be anxious, but to the degree these operations focus on criminals for whom detention and removal is mandated, those operations make communities, and immigrant communities in particular, safer. Regardless, just last week, Arlington County, Virginia, site of a September 11th terror attack targeting the Pentagon, in which 184 innocent people were murdered, barred local police from notifying ICE whenever those local police arrest terrorists and human traffickers. Arlington is far from the only so-called sanctuary jurisdiction. Numerous officials I spoke to in California when I was there last month complained about the public safety implications of that state's sanctuary law, SB 54, which hamstrings state and local officers in assisting ICE. By law, states and localities are barred from prohibiting their cops from communicating with ICE, and yet that is the purpose of many of those sanctuary policies. Likely the most short-sighted sanctuary schemes, however, attempt to bar ICE from detaining immigrants in state and private facilities in their jurisdictions. The upshot of such policies is that the agency instead must detain those aliens in more enforcement-friendly jurisdictions far away from their families and their attorneys. Respectfully, the heated rhetoric surrounding enforcement is endangering our immigration officers. 6 days ago, 2 men were arrested on a criminal complaint alleging they caused a car chase in downtown Los Angeles that impeded and endangered ICE officers. Just yesterday, in my home state of North Carolina, a man appeared in court on charges that he, quote, threatened to kill ICE agents and Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department officers if immigration enforcement actions did not stop, close quote. If this continues, people, ICE officers, members of the public, those who seek to impede immigration efforts are going to get hurt and possibly killed, but this rancor shows no sign of abating. The immigration laws mandate that certain aliens, criminals in particular, be arrested, detained, prosecuted, and usually removed. So long as those laws remain on the books, it's the duty of DHS to fully, faithfully, and yes, safely and humanely enforce those laws. Efforts to challenge such enforcement should be limited to Congress and the courts and in peaceful discourse and must not risk the lives of the officers themselves or the public as a whole. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Jordan, Chairman Van Drew, Ranking Member Raskin, and Ranking Member Crockett, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today to testify regarding the numerous current threats to ICE operations as the agency, along with law enforcement throughout the entirety of the federal government, works diligently to ensure the homeland security of the United States and the safety of the American public. As a former career official with the Department of Homeland Security, working under both Republican and Democratic leadership to help protect the country by creating and implementing Homeland Security policies and programs, I am keenly aware of the ever-present dynamics between politics and the creation of national security strategy, especially in the areas of border security and immigration enforcement. I continue my work in national security today as the CEO of Sentinel, a global risk and intelligence consulting firm, and as an adjunct professor at the University of South Carolina, teaching future generations the impact of politics on the development of national security strategy. The current volume of threats against the United States remains robust in volume, more diverse in type, and originates from more places than at any time in our history. And while the threat environment is constantly evolving, what must remain consistent as an essential foundation to secure the homeland is the indisputable need for border security, immigration enforcement, and thorough end-to-end vetting of those entering the U.S. to prevent criminal and terrorist threats from entering the country. Unfortunately, the border and immigration policies of the previous administration have undoubtedly made the country less safe by allowing very dangerous criminals and national security threats to enter the country, directly undercutting the very purpose for creating the Department of Homeland Security, subverting the statutory responsibilities of the Border Patrol, ICE, and practically every other agency tasked with protecting the homeland, and making their jobs exponentially more dangerous. In addition to these known, and in some cases unknown, physical violent threats to the everyday mission of law enforcement and the American people, we are also dealing with the impact of politics on a mission that should universally be supported, enforcing the law in the effort to safeguard the country. Inept policies and political positions of sanctuary cities, for example, which fly in the face of common sense when it comes to protecting law-abiding citizens, also creates more dangerous conditions for federal agents enforcing the immigration laws of the country, and for all of law enforcement for that matter. Political positions of not allowing state and local law enforcement to support ICE operations, no cash bail, and the release of violent repeat offenders, including those in the country illegally who should be prioritized for deportation, creates a protective shield for the most dangerous criminals from other countries in the U.S. illegally. It also endangers lives when politicians alert their communities of ICE operations or when they offer guidance to illegal migrants regarding how to evade ICE. It also further promotes to the community that in some cases they may do the same. There must be bipartisan agreement when it comes to the protection of the country and support for those who enforce the rule of law, for no civilized society has survived without it. There must also be universal consensus that despite political policy objections, elected officials at all levels must be held accountable when crossing the red line of obstruction and assault of law enforcement officials. What we saw in New Jersey at Delaney Hall Detention Center was not congressional oversight. It was an ambush, and it was violent obstruction, and it cannot be tolerated by this body. As I've discussed, there are enough threats against this country, against law-abiding citizens, and the ability to safely conduct ICE operations. There should not be additional threats originating from elected leaders against those doing their jobs, a job that the American people voted overwhelmingly in favor of them doing. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Mr. Mikowski, you may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Van Drew, Ranking Member Crockett, Chairman Jordan, and Ranking Member Raskin. I'm honored to appear before you today. My name is Scott Mikowski, and I proudly served this nation for 2 decades as a law enforcement officer and with the United States military. I retired from service from DHS in 2018 as a Deputy Field Office Director in New York City. My views are personal, shaped by 24 years of frontline duty and 34 years in the U.S. Army. Today, I speak not just from experience, but from urgency. ICE detention centers and ERO's mission are not optional. They are essential to the rule of law. Without them, our immigration system and our communities collapse into chaos. ERO's mission is straightforward: protect communities by arresting, removing individuals who pose threat to public safety or who violate federal immigration law. I spent years targeting the most dangerous elements in our nation: MS-13 gang members, drug traffickers, human rights violators, foreign fugitives. These were not theoretical threats. These were real people with real histories of violence and harm. Operations like Operation Matador and All In were successful because they were strategically designed, intelligence-driven, and supported by strong federal infrastructure and funding, including detention beds. Immigration detention is not punitive. It is a lawful tool to ensure compliance with immigration proceedings and final orders of removal. Yet 1.4 million of those ordered removed are still roaming free, a population that drives the need for more bed space. Over 60% of ICE's detained population is held under mandatory detention laws. Individuals with criminal records, flight risks, and even those that pose threat to national security. Detention is about guaranteeing aliens appear in court and that their rights are respected. It's also important to note that attorneys, family members can visit families and provide support, and that removal orders, once lawful and final, can be carried out safely, responsibly. Effective GPS monitoring, known as the ISAP program, is useful to ensure high-risk cases are able to be held in detention when detention beds are fully utilized. Now let's talk about Newark. What occurred at Delaney Hall in Newark recently was not civil disobedience, it was chaos. I've seen this before in New York. I personally witnessed a high-profile arrest spiral into pandemonium when protesters, misinformed and misled, physically blocked a medically necessary EMS transfer. They endangered the detainee's life, the officer's life, the general public's life, and ICE personnel. The Newark protest, which led to the arrest of sitting Mayor Ras Baraka, echoed that same recklessness. These actions just don't disrupt operations. They escalate risk, threaten lives, and turn lawful enforcement into a spectacle. Protest is a constitutional right. Interfering with lawful enforcement is not. Local non-cooperation laws, including sanctuary city policies, compound this threat. When local authorities refuse to share information or deny access, it drives enforcement into uncontrolled environments, homes, streets, workplaces. And that's where the danger really multiplies. It also increases costs and delays removal while weakening victim protections, intelligence sharing, and court coordination. Consider this. Nearly 8 million aliens are on the non-detained docket today. Fewer than 50,000 are in custody. When we demonize detention or defund its alternatives, we paralyze the system. We hand over the reins to not justice, but chaos. To the members of the subcommittee, I urge you to look beyond the rhetoric. The men and women of ICE are doing a job that was mandated by Congress.
Acting Director for ICE, Todd Lyons, has been relentless in his efforts atop an agency that was abolished from within by the last administration. He's maximizing limited resources to enforce law again, as Congress intended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCaskey. Mr. Hauser, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm here to speak plainly about something I care deeply about: the safety and integrity of ICE officers who serve our country on the front lines of immigration enforcement. I had the honor and privilege of serving as ICE Chief of Staff during a time of immense pressure and operational demand. I've seen firsthand the complexity and danger of the job. ICE officers perform their duties with courage, and they deserve policies that support, not endanger them. Unfortunately, that is not what is happening today. The current administration has expanded interior enforcement in ways that not just are overreaching, but are reckless. They're targeting people without criminal records, shutting down legal pathways, and revoking protections. The result? More arrests of non-criminals. These numbers might look good on press releases, but they put officers at greater risk, erode public trust in the agency, and make real enforcement harder. ICE operations are the most complex in federal law enforcement and should be respected. A simple arrest in ICE does not equate directly to more detained in ICE custody. Additionally, it does not equate cleanly to removals, and this sort of narrative needs to be stopped. The White House is driving directives and policy through political theater. This is short-sighted and dangerous. It stirs backlash that makes it harder for ICE to go after actual threats, violent offenders, cartel members, and traffickers, and it doesn't stop there. The administration is pulling in officers from other agencies from across the federal law enforcement, CBP, and the Department of Homeland Security, creating gaps. And those officers are not highly skilled or trained in interior immigration enforcement. That weakens our border security and turns immigration enforcement into a shell game. Worse still, ICE is now expected to take on and manage a vast expansion of cooperation and oversight of local law enforcement carrying out immigration enforcement. This expansion creates confusion, legal risk, and potential for real harm. It expands the administrative burdens on ICE officers and takes them away from their public safety operations. All this is stressing our resources and making the system more chaotic. Beds in detention centers are limited. When they're filled with non-criminals, that space isn't there for dangerous offenders. We clog the system with cases that go nowhere because many of these individuals can't even be removed. They're protected by law, have claims pending, or come from countries that won't take them back. It's not enforcement, it's theater. It's a churn that misleads the public, burns out the workforce, and accomplishes very little. Let me be clear. I support vigorous enforcement within ICE. However, strength comes from strategy, not rounding up the wrong people for the wrong reasons. When ICE is turned into a blunt political tool, officers are the ones who suffer, much like we saw at Delaney Hall. They're the face the public sees. They're the ones caught on video. When a mother is arrested in front of her kids, it's the officer, not the policymaker, who carries out that weight. This undermines morale within ICE, it damages trust, and it puts lives in danger. So what can we do? Congress has a role, and the subcommittee can help restore balance and safety. We need to codify enforcement priorities so officers focus on real threats. We must prohibit untrained law enforcement officers that are not trained in immigration enforcement from carrying out ICE and ERO's job. We must require ICE to adopt modern transparency tools like body-worn cameras, like we saw it used at Delaney Hall. We also need to support programs that reduce the need for at-large arrests, protecting the officer and the migrants. And we also must protect ICE officers from threats, specifically like doxing, with real legal safeguards. We also need to stop pulling agents from vital investigations, like human trafficking and drug smuggling, to chase landscapers and line cooks that do not have final orders of removal and are most likely from countries that they cannot be removed to. In short, ICE needs a clear mission, one based on law, safety, and common sense, not political showmanship. I'm proud of the men and women who I served with at ICE, and I would serve them again. They deserve better, and the American people deserve an immigration system that works for everyone. We owe that to the taxpayer. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hauser. We're now going to proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. I will start by recognizing the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly appreciate all the witnesses being here today. During Trump's first 100 days, ICE arrested 67,000 illegal aliens and removed almost 66,000 from this country. Of those, almost 50,000 were criminal illegal aliens, either with a criminal record or facing criminal charges. Mr. Arthur, what categories of aliens are generally held in ICE detention?
Generally, it's criminals, individuals who are subject to mandatory detention because of crimes under Sections 236C and 241A2, in addition to individuals who are apprehended entering the United States subject to mandatory detention under Section 235B.
Okay, and Mr. Mikowski, this may be something, I don't know, you maybe can help me understand, but my understanding was when folks came across the border here, the background check we didn't really go back to their home country. So how do we eventually identify those? In other words, we're looking for crimes they committed in the United States, but we don't know if from Guatemala, wherever they came from. How is it that we eventually figure that out, and why is it that we don't know when they're coming? Mr. Bukowski or Mr. Arthur, either one, Moreno, whoever may have the answer to that.
Well, the problem has been the lack of thorough vetting for any of these illegal migrants that have been allowed to come into the United States. So never mind the countries of origin that oftentimes can't be verified. We don't even know who these individuals are. And we know that trickles down all the way to the unaccompanied minors with the lack of DNA testing that was done away with early in the Biden administration. We now have, well over 350,000 that are missing within the interior of the country. So this becomes a guessing game now for authorities who are trying to rectify this system under the Trump administration. It's challenging. And then when you finally do discover the countries of origin, sometimes they don't want to accept these illegal migrants back.
One thing I found fairly interesting is when I went to the border, we saw thousands of IDs thrown down south of the border. So in other words, folks coming in, they had an ID in hand and they tossed it on the ground before they come across. And talking about the 350,000 children that the Biden administration lost, we don't know where they're at, what they're being trafficked into. But I had an individual who came across, he was 31 years old. He identified as an unaccompanied minor and raped a 14-year-old girl in a restaurant, in a restroom. And he already had a criminal record, but it's amazing to me that we didn't know his record when he came here. But then when you go see the border and you see all these thousands of IDs laying across that southern border, they don't want you to know who they are when they're coming here. And so, Mr. Arthur, why are these ICE detention centers, why are they so very important?
ICE detention is absolutely crucial for the enforcement of the law. ICE detention serves the two purposes: one, ensuring that individuals will show up for their immigration proceedings and their removal, but more importantly, to ensure that individuals who pose a danger to the community aren't allowed to be in the community while we go through that process. In fact, any individual who is eligible for bond can ask for bond if they don't have a crime. They can ask for bond from an immigration judge. I heard thousands of these cases. If they didn't pose a danger to the community and they weren't a flight risk, they were eligible for bond. Otherwise, they'd be detained because they're not going to show up.
Mr. Bukowski, you said you retired in 2018 from ICE. What was it like then compared to what you've heard from your colleagues in the last few years? How does the morale, what's going on, and what are they seeing on the streets?
Thank you for the question, sir. My experience was ICE officers are out there every day doing a job that Congress mandated. It's codified. I mean, there's funding for it. There's directives that come directly from Congress. And the men and women are out there every single day. And
so when you say codified, it's the law.
Yes, sir.
And so it always amazes me that how when we're enforcing certain laws, everybody comes up in arms. But to me, it's just a matter of we are trying to enforce the laws on the books. You guys, the officers on the street are trying to do what Congress has mandated. So what are you seeing with the morale now? Was it better? I assume it would have been better in 2018.
Yes, sir. They felt under the last administration they were totally abandoned, left out to dry. It was a field day. They weren't doing their jobs. They were sitting there. Nobody really cared. Meaning the people there felt like ICE was literally abolished without an actual order from Congress abolishing ICE.
So I'm running out of time, but so the same party that wanted to defund the police have basically attacked ICE for doing their job.
Absolutely, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
gentleman from Alabama leads back. I will recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've got a lot of people out here in the audience, and if you came in support, to show your support for Representative LaMonica McIver, would you stand up, please? Okay, that looks like around 60 folks. Thank y'all for coming, and you may be seated. And let the record reflect, Mr. Chairman, the vast number of people who came in support of Representative LaMonica McIver.
Without objection.
The Trump administration has weaponized justice, using the Department of Injustice to carry forward an assault on liberty. Trump has threatened and intimidated a number of lawyers and powerful law firms into submission. He has put powerful institutions of higher learning under his thumb, and he has forced powerful media companies to bow down and kiss his ring. Now he's threatening and trying to intimidate his adversaries in elective office. Last month, Trump's Department of Injustice arrested a female judge doing her job at the courthouse in Milwaukee. They then arrested the mayor of Newark, in the same city that he leads. And now, yesterday, they have filed charges against a member of the House of Representatives. And today, we are engaged in a pre-planned hearing entitled, quote, "Examining Threats to ICE Operations," end quote, while producing a highly prejudicial, expertly edited video published to taint the jury pool and shape a false narrative on Representative McIver's actions. MAGA Republicans are using this hearing to justify the charges against her. And in support of the charges, they publish more video that demonizes people being held in private, for-profit ICE detention facilities. What is really happening is that Trump and his MAGA enablers are misusing their positions of power to prosecute people who refuse to lay down and get run over as they assault our liberties. And they are trying to intimidate members of Congress from performing our duties. That's why we are really here today. Last night, Trump's personal attorney, who he appointed to be interim United States Attorney for New Jersey, blatantly abused her authority to target a sitting congresswoman who had been roughed up by armed, mask-wearing ICE agents, males. This interim U.S. attorney targeted my colleague, but just because Representative McIver had the audacity to do her job rather than taking the Trump administration's word that everything was fine. Members of Congress have the legal authority to visit ICE facilities so that we can perform oversight. It's one of the things we are elected to do. But this administration has become increasingly authoritarian and will not tolerate anyone asking questions. That's why Trump and my Republican colleagues call for the impeachment of any judge who rules against this administration. It is why the Trump administration targets students who expressed dissent. And it's why Trump muzzled the big law firms that previously stood up for civil liberties and have now agreed to stay quiet and do his bidding. The Trump administration continues to abandon the Constitution, and the Department of Justice continues to politicize the pursuit of justice. They've come after judges, mayors, members of Congress, and our neighbors and our communities. Who's next? Is it you? Representative McIver has her legal rights. They threaten her, and in threatening her, they threaten us. No one is safe once you can be targeted just for asking questions and trying to ensure that the government is following the law. Now, Mr. Hauser, right now our MAGA Republicans are trying to pass a massive spending bill that would increase the national debt by $3.3 trillion and give ICE a staggering $73 billion to build more private, for-profit detention facilities. Can you please explain how this massive cash infusion, and especially the $45 billion expansion of immigration detention, is neither wise, strategic, or safe?
Sir, it clearly shows the need for oversight as they expand detention. You're going to outsize the need of what ICE actually needs operationally. Additionally, it will take deportation officers off the streets and now will be in these facilities, so actually making us less safe. Additionally, the idea that you're going to detain 100 to 150,000 people and spend $45 billion or $70 billion to do it, if you took that same money and just put it to fix the broken immigration system now, you could hire thousands of individuals that could be adjudicating cases, immigration judges, resettlement services. Sir, quite frankly, you could give a couple $1 billion to a country to take some of the migrants back themselves and they would go. The idea that you're going to put this into detention and that will fix the system is a bit absurd.
Well, they want the billions.
Gentleman's time has
their
expired.
Political supporters' pocketbooks.
The gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman yields back. Okay, and I recognize the gentleman from the great state of Texas, Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing today on what I believe to be one of the most, probably the most important issue that our country faces right now, which is illegal immigration. Mr. Hauser, I've got a few questions for you. You were Chief of Staff for ICE, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What years were you there?
2021 to 2023.
So that was during the Biden administration, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Got it. So presumably you're well-versed in border security and immigration enforcement, is that right?
Yes, sir. I would say that I'm very aware. I also worked at CBP under the Obama administration. Yes, sir.
Got it. So you've got a lot of experience there. I'm going to ask you a few questions. In an interview with the Daily Blast on February 28th, 2024, you mentioned, quote, "You can't deter and punish your way to lowering encounters at the border," end quote. Do you think you were right or wrong about that?
100%, sir. What we've seen...
100% what? Right or wrong?
100% I was correct.
You were correct about that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The idea that you just dismantle an immigration system is not... There was a mandate to the Trump administration.
Illegal alien border encounters are down 95% right now. I think you were wrong about that. You also said, quote, "The idea that you can turn off the border is just not factual." Do you think that was right or wrong?
Sir, the threats that we're still seeing across the border...
Do you think you were right or wrong about that statement?
What's that, sir?
My question is, were you right or wrong about that statement?
When you turn off the immigration system, sir, yes, you will not see encounters. Yes.
Well, southwestern border encounters are at a 15-year low under President Trump. Another thing that you mentioned, quote, "Just shutting off the border to asylum seekers is not going to do that," meaning close the border. What I think is going to do that is make it more erratic and sporadic for the sort of large surges of migrants you would see coming across the border. Do you think that was right or wrong?
100% correct. It was correct, sir. We're going to see that over the next couple years. Yes.
Border apprehensions are down now because President Trump has secured our border. He's stopped the flow of illegal aliens coming across our border and coming to our border. Do you think that we have a better or worse border situation now than we did under Joe Biden?
Sir, I believe the border is secure.
You believe the border is secure, that's right. But you were wrong about a lot of other things, about what would secure the border, is that right?
No, sir, it's only been 100 days.
You were wrong about what it would take to stop the flow of illegal aliens coming into the United States. You were wrong that secure enforcement that we're seeing under President Trump would stop the flow of illegal aliens. You ought to keep that in mind as you're going to the media and mouthing off about the president.
Can I answer that question?
Let me ask you another question. This is from a New York Times op-ed that you wrote just a month ago.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned, quote, "Federal law enforcement under President Trump is engaged in dangerous political theater." What about President Trump's law enforcement do you think is dangerous political theater? Do you think that seizing 235,000 pounds of fentanyl at the border is dangerous political theater?
Is a problem.
Do you think seizing fentanyl at our border is dangerous political theater? Do you know who Gilberto Avila Jara is?
So that's exactly where ICE should have their resources focused. That's exactly what
and
this
we
administration
did, and
is
he was
beginning to turn
arrested
them away
last
from.
month and charged with over 20 sex crimes against minors.
Yes, sir.
These were the kind of people that Joe Biden
2,000
and
CBP
under your
officers
leadership
off the border
were coming into
over
our
the next
country.
3 months doesn't make us more safe. Taking HSI agents away from drug interdiction, and
taking murderers and
trafficking,
rapists
human
off our
smuggling
streets makes the American
doesn't make
people
us
more safe. It's your testimony that taking murderers and rapists off our streets does not make us more safe?
What I'm saying,
is that what
sir,
you're telling me?
what we have heard from this administration is over the next few months, there's going to be thousands of law enforcement focused on non-criminal migrants.
We'll see. You were wrong about a lot of things. I don't put a whole lot of stock into that, candidly, and I don't think the American people do either. Do you support amnesty?
No, sir.
Do you support amnesty for illegal aliens?
No, sir.
In this New York Times article, you wrote, quote, "That means that the best solution for public safety is not mass deportations.
No, I
it's giving
support
undocumented
immigration
I'm
support
speaking
for
right now.
migrants that need
This is my
protection
time,
under our
not
law.
yours. I'm speaking. It's giving undocumented immigrants who have been in the United States for a long time the opportunity to come forward, pay a fine, and gain legal status." That
Yes, sir.
sounds a lot like amnesty to me, doesn't it, to
It's
you?
a process, sir, under the law that could exercise and allow them for
That's
migrants to come out of the
amnesty.
shadows and then focus.
That's what amnesty is. This is a deliberate semantic obfuscation, and you know it, and I know it, and the American people know it as
it's not,
well. Do you think that illegal aliens should be given welfare once they get amnesty?
Sir, that's not my department.
You've got a lot of opinions on a whole lot of different things. You don't have an opinion
Areas
on that?
where I've worked for 20 years, sir. Yes, sir.
And finally, let me ask you, do you think that Biden was successful at stopping illegal immigration?
There was failures at the beginning of the Biden administration to deal with the flow of migrants post-COVID, and then there was failures of implementation of policies across all of the immigration system. That's the same problems we're seeing now. The idea that you can enforce your way out of immigration and the challenges that we see across the Western Hemisphere, it's not going to work.
We had an open border under Biden. The border's secure now. I think that's a successful Trump policy and a failure of the Biden administration. I yield my time back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. With that, stay tuned. You ready?
As ready as I'm going to be.
No, okay. I yield to the gentlelady from the great state of Texas, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Crockett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Hauser, thank you so much for your service. I do want to make sure that we are clear on your credentials because you actually have them. I have that you were the Assistant Director of Legislative Affairs at Homeland Security, correct?
At one time, yes, ma'am, about
You were
15 years ago.
You were Deputy Chief of Staff at Homeland as well?
Yes, ma'am.
You served as a Senior Advisor to the Commission as Homeland's Custom and Border Protections,
Yes, ma'am.
as well as you recently served as the Chief of Staff for ICE.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you've done a few things.
I'm also a combat veteran. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, thank you for your service in all ways. Here, listen, I have a series of issues of what's going on because I will say that the Republicans were right. Democrats lost on immigration. When you look at all the polling, when you talk to people, they lost on immigration. And frankly, I am concerned that we did not have conversations that went beyond just talking about the humanity, because there are people that literally don't care about humanity, which is why we are able to have this administration doing the things that they're doing. Talking about the fact that border crossings are down 95%, well, I don't know if I can trust that number or not. You know why? Because first of all, they've been going out, they've been firing all of the persons that usually deal with data, science, and facts all over in all agencies, in addition to the fact that even if that is a real number, we don't know if they got to that number just because, well, this is a lawless administration that is consistently in violation of people's constitutional rights, the Constitution in and of itself, court orders. So we can't really explain exactly why and how, even if that is true. And at some point in time, you have to say there is a balancing test. Either we are going to follow the law fully or we're not at all. And frankly, what I've seen out of this administration is that they don't want to follow the law. But there is something that you said in your opening remarks that really stuck with me. There was a line that I wrote down. You said, line cooks and landscapers. Now, I have talked to those that are in construction. I have talked to those that are farmers. I have talked to a lot of people that have said that because of the reckless acts of so many of these ICE agents, they can't even get their workers to show up to work because of what they're doing. Now, you correct me if I'm wrong. As somebody that practiced criminal law, I never saw that we needed ICE to go and arrest somebody, say, for murder. Is ICE the only agency that has the authority to arrest somebody, say, if they go out and commit murder?
No, ma'am, they're not. But
what about aggravated robbery?
No, ma'am.
What about rape?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so in fact, 9 times out of 10, the primary arresting agency when it comes to, say, committing a crime such as aggravated robbery, rape, murder, would that be ICE? Would that be the primary arresting and investigatory agency to do that in the first place?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So I just wanted to make sure I was on the right page because I get a little confused sometimes when we're around here. Now, we have talked about a lot of the kind of back and forth between the branches. And this idea of checks and balances seems to escape certain folk in the chamber. And so I really want to ask you just a couple of questions to make sure I'm not the one that has lost my marbles. Who has the right to conduct oversight? Or let me ask you this way. Does Congress have the power to conduct federal oversight over detention facilities?
Yes, ma'am, and quite frankly, a bit of confusion that I've been hearing today. Oversight by Congress is, of course, mandated by law, but additionally, oversight also, not only in the immigration space, protects the migrants, but also protects law enforcement and through public safety in making sure they have the resources they need. In my position, over 15 years at the department, I oversaw hundreds of visits by congressional members, advocacy groups, immigration groups, law enforcement groups, and in no way did I ever see the sort of situation that we saw in Delaney Hall where there was a powder keg driven by the political theater being driven by the White House.
That's exactly right. And that's actually why I wanted to make sure I talked about the fact that you had credentials and you've actually been in this space. That was not normal. And the idea that they would somehow say that it's their colleagues that were the ones that were driving it, which is why I made sure that I showed video footage of Representative McIver very calmly telling them why she was there. And frankly, it is sad that we do have to go through this kind of political theater because, listen, we all know what it is. That's why they hired everybody from Fox News, because all they're trying to do is put on for a show. This is not the Apprentice show. This is supposed to be about the American people, and I want us to start to refocus our attention on the American people and stop demonizing every daggone person that ends up in custody of ICE, because they are not necessarily demons just because ICE decided to round them up. So thank you for your testimony.
Can I answer that question?
No. The gentle lady yields back. The committee will be in order. I understand your enthusiasm, but we have rules in the way we run the committee for both sides of the aisle. With that being said, I will recognize the gentleman from the great state of Ohio, the chairman of the whole Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mikowski, who are all these people in ICE detention facilities that Democrats went on the street? Who are these folks? Are they all just apple pie, asylum-seeking folks, or who else might be in there?
Sir, thank you for the question. First and foremost, they're immigration law violators. They violated the basic laws, the immigration laws that are codified by Congress. I'll say it again.
So they broke the law?
Yes, sir. That's first and foremost. They're not a United States citizen.
Any of them violent? In addition to breaking the law, any of them violent people inside these detention centers?
Absolutely, sir.
Any of them gang members?
Absolutely, sir.
Any of them members of MS-13?
Absolutely, sir.
Any of them Trendy Aragua gang members?
Again, sir, yes.
So they're not just all warm and fuzzy folks that the Democrats want out on the street, right? They're bad guys. Some of them are bad guys, really bad guys. Now, some of them are just asylum seekers, but some of them are really bad guys. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir, it's fair to say.
Yeah, because you worked in these facilities, is that right?
I've worked in them, sir, yes.
You know them better than anyone in this hearing room. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and before they go to detention, they have to get apprehended somewhere. They have to get arrested or taken into custody by ICE. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You got to get them somewhere. You know, maybe it's on the border, maybe it's somewhere else. But you have to get them before you take them to the ICE detention facility.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, did you ever think that you would see Democrat mayors in all kinds of urban areas around this country and Democrat city councils pass resolutions say, don't work with ICE when they come to apprehend gang members, bad guys, MS-13 violent offenders? Did you ever think you'd see that?
Not here in the United States, sir.
But that's exactly what's happening around the country, isn't it?
Yes, sir. In my home state of New Jersey, that's fact.
Yeah, it's happened everywhere. New Jersey, Denver, Boston, you name it. It's happened. And did you ever think you'd see governors and state legislatures do the same thing and say, you know what? Our whole darn state is going to be a sanctuary state. Don't work with ICE when they're coming to enforce the law. Did you ever think you'd see that?
No, sir.
Did you ever think you would see judges in their chambers tell the bad guy, hey, talk to his lawyer, hey, slip out the back door because the ICE agents are coming in the front door to enforce federal law? Did you ever think you'd see that?
No, sir.
And did you ever think you would see what happened last week or 2 weeks ago, I should say, in New Jersey? Did you ever think you'd see members of Congress engage in that kind of behavior?
Sir, after what I witnessed in 2018, yes, in New York City, I didn't put it past anybody, but I find that behavior to be absurd.
Well, in other words, Mr. McCall, it's gotten so bad, nothing surprises you now with what the left's going to do.
Nothing, sir.
I know, and that's where the American people are, and that's why they appreciate what the Trump administration is doing. Why is it better to arrest people at the jails or at the courthouse, Mr. Mikowski, than it is out on the street? Why is that better?
I believe my colleague had touched on it, but it's much safer for the alien, the person involved, and it's also safer for the general public. Most importantly, the officers. The rule of thumb is safety first.
It's safer for everyone, right?
Yes, sir.
It's safer for everyone. Safer for the migrant, safer for law enforcement, safer for the general public, because you don't want to happen what has happened already because of the crazy left-wing policies that some of these cities and states and now judges have. When you could send two, it's cheaper for the taxpayers. Instead of sending 6 guys to arrest them on the street, you can send 2 guys to get him at the courthouse or at the jail. But that side says no. We're for the sanctuary policies. We're for making it tougher on law enforcement. We're for endangering the community. We're for making it tougher on the migrant and going out and arresting them on the street. Really, one of the craziest things I've ever heard. Would you agree, Mr. Mikowski?
Yes, sir. And to your point, we talk about sanctuary cities, and my colleague was mentioning like deportation officers need to be on the street. Imagine if they would just honor detainers, they rolled over into custody, and I could send people over there to pick them up in a facility, not taking the officers away from an enforcement action. Okay, so deportation officers are very vital.
Yes.
And you know, the peaceful transfer from one facility to the other is just common sense, sir.
No, we call that, in economics, you call that opportunity cost, right? Because it's safer for the officer, safer for the public, safer for the migrant, but it also, when you have to send 6 of them out on the street, there's the opportunity lost that you now have 4 extra agents there when they could be out doing other good work protecting the public. That's how dumb, there's no other word for it, how dumb this whole sanctuary policy is. Thank you for your work.
The chairman from Ohio yields back. I recognize the gentleman, the ranking member from the great state of Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
And thank you, Chairman Van Drew. Even ICE and the Department of Homeland Security recognize that, quote, any member of Congress has the right to show up for an inspection at one of our facilities in their oversight capability. Mr. Hauser, is that the general policy that you know?
Yes, sir.
Okay. ICE has also, along with lots of other parts of the administration, has been repudiated by the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court. There are now more than 160 preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders that have been entered by federal judges, Republican appointees, Democratic appointees against a reign of lawlessness and complete disregard for the Constitution. President Trump has had to be instructed to bring back a man who the Department of Justice admitted had been deported due to an administrative error. He was sent to a torturer's prison in El Salvador due to what they confessed was administrative error. Do you agree that ICE has been violating the law repeatedly over the last few months?
Sir, I would say the administration and the White House has been directing lawless action.
The U.S. Supreme Court even had to issue an emergency order at 1 in the morning on April 19th to stop an unlawful attempt by the administration to conduct a mass deportation of Venezuelans without any due process whatsoever. They told them to turn the vans and the buses around. There had been no hearings, no opportunity to be represented, no opportunity to hear even the charges against them, no court orders. And just this last Friday, the Supreme Court upheld this ban on deportations, reaffirming once again that every immigrant in the country is entitled to due process. The two most beautiful words in the English language. It's due process that separates our rights and freedoms from arbitrary power by the state. And if you have a single libertarian bone in your body, you will understand what due process is all about. Now, why is congressional oversight important, Mr. Hauser, if the courts are there as a backstop against lawlessness by an executive branch?
Sir, Congress's role, especially in immigration enforcement, is extremely critical for just the simple fact that we have tens of thousands of human beings in custody. And their care and the carrying out of our public safety and our law enforcement operations need critical oversight and accountability.
So when you were chief of staff at ICE, how many congressional delegations would you say happened at ICE facilities?
Hundreds, sir. And as we've all talked about, we saw large demands and migratory flow to the border. We were dealing with bipartisan, visits continuously week after week.
These were Democrats and Republicans
Yes,
together coming to visit. So there's nothing strange about members of Congress doing it. Both parties have done it, right?
No, sir.
Did anything like what just occurred at Delaney Hall, where members of Congress were pushed and manhandled and threatened with arrest, and there was a melee, did anything like that ever happen in your experience?
No, sir. And what I saw there was sort of this distilling of what I consider the direction of enforcement, immigration enforcement, in the political theater of this. That was the outcome that some people in the White House wanted. And they're putting that pressure both on the non-migrants that are non-criminal, that don't have final order removal, and also on the ICE officers.
Well, you mentioned the phrase political theater several times, and that's interesting to me because I remember at the end of the Biden administration when there was a struggle to get the two parties together and there was agreement, a bipartisan agreement on legislation at the border. And you had the most conservative Republicans in the Senate hailing it and saying it's a huge breakthrough. You had liberal Democrats getting behind it, and everybody was saying, well, it's not perfect, but we'll do this. And it was sailing through the Senate, it's coming over to the House, and then President Trump, former President Trump at that point, announced he was totally opposed to it. He didn't want border legislation. He wanted a border crisis to run against. In other words, he wanted political theater. I wonder, was that your perception of that same episode?
Absolutely, sir. And when you watch the videos of what happened at Delaney Hall, ICE officers are trained from the beginning of when they enter the agency on assessing threat and risk. And clearly, and they sort of apply that threat and risk to what they carry out in operations. And I believe everybody on this panel would agree that then they allowed the Congresswoman to then enter the facility and take the tour. So the idea that there was outside political pressure or influence directed at ICE agents and that created this powder keg of what happened there is pretty clear and logical to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's up.
I thank the ranking member. I am going to yield 5 minutes to myself. So, I like to keep things simple sometimes. I'm from Jersey too. And sometimes simple truths really kind of display more complex truths as well. So I think there's a few simple truths. And I'm going to ask all of you, and I'm going to ask for a really quick, yes or no answer. I believe open borders, sanctuary cities, and sanctuary states where you're releasing individuals back into the community, including dangerous criminals who have been guilty and have committed crimes like rape on minors, like murder, like disfigurement, like dealing and selling drugs, just to name a few, like violating gun laws, all of that. I think that's really bad. I don't think we should let that happen. Let's really get down to what this is all about. In the last administration, we let people like that come across the border and come into the United States of America. Would you agree with me that that's bad? Mr. Arthur, quickly, yes or no?
Yes, I do, sir.
Mr. Marino, yes
Yes.
or no? Mr. Makowski, yes or no?
Absolutely, sir.
Mr.
Yes.
Hauser, yes or no? Okay, so that's something we've already done better on. We're straightening that out now. We are not allowing those individuals to come into the United States of America. Do you believe, as I do, that as members of Congress, and you can state this, don't be afraid to say it, that we have an added level of responsibility, the way that we comport ourselves, whether we are Republicans, whether we are Democrats, whatever we are, that we should behave in a certain fashion. We write laws, so you would believe that we would follow the rule and believe in the rule of law itself. So, and I believe we do have oversight. It's a process. You behave a certain way. It doesn't mean that you agree with everybody. It doesn't mean you don't investigate, but that you, as a member of Congress, as a congressman or a congresswoman, behave in an appropriate fashion lawfully, not in a combative assault type of way. Would you believe that that is true? Mr. Arthur, yes or no?
Yes, and I attempted to comport myself that way when I was an oversight counsel.
I'm sure you did. Mr. Marino, yes or no?
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Mikowski, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hauser, yes or no?
Absolutely, sir. It's what the military.
So we saw the video. You saw the video. I don't have to say any words. Look at the video. Even all you who came here with a certain focus in your mind and were told to believe something, look at the video and see what it shows. That's all I'll say. Thirdly, do you think there's a financial effect on all of us in America while we debate the great issues of the day? How much should we spend? Where should we spend it? What should we do with the fiscal resources that we have, with the dollars that we bring in through taxation? Do you believe it's inappropriate to fund illegals, including illegal criminals, which we have? I could ask you that question. In fact, I'll ask a real question very quickly. In the past administration, did we at times fund illegal aliens? I'm sorry, illegal criminal aliens.
Absolutely.
Did we fund illegal criminal aliens?
Yes, sir.
Did we fund illegal criminal aliens in the last administration? Did we, Mr. Hauser,
What does fund mean, sir? Like,
give them stuff. Give them housing, give them clothing, give them transportation, give them education, give them, in some cases, debit cards. Did we do that?
we have provided resources to migrants
Right,
for
we
60
funded
years.
them.
60 years, sir.
We funded them. Not
The first
illegal
Trump
bad
administration.
people, we didn't. No, I disagree, and that's wrong. And would you believe that costs people? We don't even have to go into it. Of course it costs the taxpayer. Of course, when resources are sparse, and we'll argue about Medicaid and SNAP and all these things, how about we don't give money to people who are really bad people doing bad things, send them back to the country of origin? Maybe that's a good idea. And I did want to address the ranking member, not the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Raskin. He always loves to talk about the Senate bill, so I always have to talk about it as well. It was a bad bill. I didn't know, I knew it was a bad bill the minute we saw it in Judiciary. Had nothing to do with Donald Trump. It codified illegal aliens. It allowed up to 1.8 million to come into the country before anything was done. It did nothing about catch and release. It did nothing about the wall. It didn't rebuild the wall. It did nothing when in the past we had Title 42. And it didn't do anything about the Remain in Mexico policy. Now, real quickly, would you agree that some of those policies in the past administration were good, and that we really didn't need a whole lot more legislation, that we could have done it through the president at the time under the Biden administration? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Mr. Marino,
Yes,
yes
sir.
or no? Mr. Mikowski, yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Hauser,
Sir,
yes
can
or
you
no?
just give me the question one more time?
All the things that I just mentioned, all the things that could be done to protect our borders. We had the biggest disaster in border crossings in our American history. Couldn't we have prevented that purely by presidential action, not by a faulty, bad Senate bill? I think you're going to see a good bill come out of this Congress.
Sir, I would
That
only
bill was a
state that
bad
this
bill.
is only the first 100 days. You're going to see border surges. over
I didn't
the
ask
next
that
year, too.
question.
And two, we don't need the Alien and Sedition Act to carry out
Were
immigration
nobody's
enforcement.
talking
We have
about
Title VIII.
Do you believe that we could have done better in the Biden administration through presidential action than we did?
Sir, clearly.
Yes or no? Yes
at the
or
beginning,
no?
sir, there was mistakes.
Yes or no? Yeah, we screwed up. We did a bad job in the Biden administration. You know, I mean, even you've got to kind of admit that. And now we're trying to straighten out the mess. With that, I will yield back. And I yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Moskowitz. You may even have a joke or two for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a joke, just a quick clarification. The bill that he's talking about that was terrible was a Republican bill, so it's fine. It happens. I just a quick clarification of.
If it's bad, it's bad. I don't care what party.
No. I just wanted to remind people that it was a conservative, very conservative, Republican senator who had drafted that bill. With that, I want to yield as much time as she may consume to the ranking member, Jasmine Crockett.
All right. Mr. Hauser, it's back to us. I like games every once in a while, and so I have some questions. The questions are going to be, is it political theater or progress? You ready? The first question is going to be, doing an executive order revoking birthright citizenship, political theater or progress?
Political theater, it doesn't help the mission of ICE.
Okay. How about revoking student visas?
It takes up the time of ICE officers and is political theater, and it takes away from the national security and public safety mission.
How about bashing car windows of people with no criminal record?
That's driven from quotas of arrests being driven by the White House. And that is politicization of ICE immigration enforcement, so it's political theater.
How about deporting people who are even citizens? That's not even deportation, but you know what I'm saying.
It's political theater, and I believe that this White House is getting the outcome, the reaction that they want and they desire.
How about arresting political opponents?
That would be political theater.
Yeah, so here's the deal. I know that you've been cut off a number of times as you have tried to give answers to various questions. Thank you so much for explaining that even this committee hearing is actually a bunch of political theater, because there's a lot of things that we could be talking about. We could be talking about the fact that we are currently in reconciliation, and while everyone else has been told to do things such as make sure that you take food out of people's mouths, make sure that you get rid of people's health care, make sure that you are harming our federal workers even more by making sure that the resources that they need to be able to do their job just kind of disappear. But at the same time, I think the way that Mr. Moskowitz figured it, it would be approximately $44,000 as it relates to a bonus for each ICE agent. Is that correct?
It's incorrect. It was $42,000.
Okay, my bad. But the reality is that we do have real problems. And I don't know how we're gonna get to real solutions if we continue to just make everything about politics. As it was properly outlined by the gentleman from Florida, that was a Republican bill. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I wasn't really a big fan of the bill myself on my side. So I know that there was a lot of conservative stuff in that bill that was going to be harmful. And with that, I am gonna yield back to the gentleman from Florida.
Yeah, and I'm gonna yield time to the ranking member Judicial in a second. Mr. Marino, on that topic of bonuses, just real quick, do you support ICE agents getting $42,000 worth of bonuses? There's $800 billion for bonuses. Okay. I say billion, I'm sorry, million, I apologize. $800 million in there for bonuses. Do you support that?
Yeah, what kind of bonuses are we talking about? Are we talking retention bonuses?
This is a great question, Mr. Marino. Great question. They didn't say at all in the backup. Yeah. There was no documentation at all what the bonuses were for or what it was just $800 million for bonuses. It sounded like a lot of money for federal employees for bonuses. Not that we don't want to treat our federal employees great, of course we do. But I had suggested $500 million for bonuses, and they said, no, $500 million sounds a little better, right?
Well, look.
Or zero. Are you at zero for bonuses, maybe?
I never received a $42,000 bonus.
Good, perfect, we agree. I would like
However, times are different. Recruiting is tougher. Retention is a challenge. And if that's something that it's needed for, I would support it.
So do you support those bonuses for NOAA, FEMA, the Pentagon, all of the departments, or just ICE?
I would support strategic use of retention bonuses where they were needed.
Okay. I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Moskowitz. Mr. Hauser introduced the important idea of political theater. You've introduced the idea of bureaucratic bloat. And our ranking member on the subcommittee has talked about the assault on the living standards of millions and millions of people in the country and their health care. I just want to add one final piece of this, which is that Donald Trump and his family have been making more than $1 billion a month since they got into office on the crypto scam, and now he's collecting a $400 million airplane from the dictator of Qatar. There is an absolute ripoff of the taxpayers taking place and a prostitution of the presidency. And I think that completes the picture for what's taking place in our country today. I yield back to the gentleman, and thank you.
And I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Florida yields. I recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Dr. Onder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all our witnesses for being here. Mr. Hauser, thank you for your service to our country as a combat veteran. But no thank you to the Biden administration for precipitating the worst border crisis in American history. I would say that Joe Biden and his administration were incompetent, but I think it was intentional. It was intentional that he flooded at least 8 million illegal aliens into our country. And what is the Democrat solution? The Democrat solution seems to be, unless you've been convicted of a violent crime, you can stay. Not only can you stay, but we will pass amnesty bills to support you. We will block enforcement of immigration laws and endanger ICE officers with sanctuary city policies. We'll give you welfare. We'll give you health care. We'll give you free education. You know, if you want to come here as a birthright tourist, your kids will be citizens, and that will help you to stay in the country permanently. We'll give you free stays at luxury hotels. Oh yeah, Biden and his administration have really done a great job. Donald Trump has lowered illegal border crossings by 95%. Somehow that doesn't count. There are going to be surges later on, don't you know? Well, you know, this all gets away from the purpose of this hearing, which is the fact that activist protests, including those by members of Congress, obstruct immigration enforcement and undermine public safety. In April and May alone, there were more than 14 demonstrations planned across 12 states targeting ICE detention centers and related facilities. These types of demonstrations physically impede ICE detention center operations on purpose and inhibit the successful processing of detained illegal aliens. And you know what? I do care whether illegal aliens have committed violent crimes, of course, but I think every illegal immigrant, as you've pointed out, Mr. Mikowski, has broken the law and needs to leave. And to me, due process is you prove that they're not here legally, they get the hell out of our country.
The gentleman yield for a friendly question.
No, I do not. It's my time. You've spoken about 4 times so far in this hearing. For example, on May 4th, 2025, activists protested an ICE field office as a detention bus left, with law enforcement agents forced to surround the bus to prevent interference, diverting staff from other duties and delaying detainee transfers. The protests directly impeded law enforcement, federal law, and put ICE officers at risk. Mr. Mikowski, do law enforcement officers and ICE officers, do they receive training how to deal with crowds and riots?
Sir, yes, sir, they do.
I'm sorry, is the time clock is, I don't know how much, I think I have some time left, but the time clock went black. Oh, there we go. Okay. How are ICE officials trained to react when a gate would be broken and stormed by a group of raucous protesters?
Sir, from what I saw in the video, I think they handled themselves the way they could, the best they could in that situation. I mean, what I saw was a lot of belly bumping from lawmakers, putting their hands on the officers, whether you agree or not agree. It's unlawful. Yeah. It shouldn't happen.
Well, there's assault and there's battery, and when you touch another person without their consent, that's battery. And battery of a law enforcement officer, is that a violation of the law?
Yes, sir.
Even if you're a member of Congress?
Yes, sir.
We members of Congress aren't above the law.
Absolutely, sir. And they were trying to protect maybe the facility. There was a lot of commotion there. Their number one concern at that moment is making sure nobody enters a secure environment and that could pose risk to a detainee or a congressperson or anybody else in that situation, sir.
Right. Why do DHS and ICE officers, why do they wear body cams?
Sir, can I answer that question?
Sure.
As Chief of Staff of ICE, I implemented the first policy for body-worn cameras, and they created a pilot within Homeland Security investigations to carry that out. That, in the last year, has been rescinded by the current administration.
Okay.
So they are not funding, and they are not moving forward with the body-worn camera program under the Trump administration. But I was glad to see, quite frankly, in the criminal complaint against the Congresswoman, that some of the officers still had their cameras on.
Yeah.
So hopefully this Congress
and we have footage
commit to fully
we have
implementing this across immigration.
footage of officers being assaulted.
Mr. Under, if I could respond to that question.
Yes.
It's a twofold purpose. One, it protects the officer from any allegations that they engaged in violations of civil rights laws, and it also reminds the officer of the fact that somebody's always watching.
And Mr. Arthur, why do ICE officers occasionally wear masks?
ICE officers occasionally wear a mask because, unfortunately, in this heated environment, they get doxxed, they get attacked, they get threatened at their homes. People disclose where they live, disclose their phone numbers, where their children go to school.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you all for your testimony. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. That concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses.
Mr. Chairman, can I have a UC request? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
There's two articles. One is, this is a letter from members of the New Jersey delegation to the committee condemning efforts by the administration to politicize lawful congressional oversight.
By the way, that's some of the New Jersey delegation.
Or from some members of the New Jersey delegation, yeah. And then this one is from the Washington Post. Elon Musk, enemy of open borders, launched his career as an illegal alien.
Without objection.
I've got a UC as well. This is from the Associated Press. President Trump's first 3 children did not receive birthright citizenship. This is an article that came out of the fact that Donald Trump Jr. as well as Eric and Ivanka were born to a woman who was not a U.S. citizen at the time.
Without objection. It concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses for appearing before the subcommittee and spending their time with us. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, this hearing is adjourned.
For decades, the United States has had an existential problem with illegal immigration. This isn't something that's new. It wasn't something that was created under the Biden administration. We've had it for a long time. And Republicans in Congress and in the rest of the country outside of Washington, D.C., demanded border security, that Washington would actually do what we said we would do on the campaign trail and secure the border and stop the flow of illegal immigration. And what would happen in Washington is that Republicans would ask for border security. We would ask for a wall. We would ask for things that we can fund that would stem this tide of illegal immigration. And in response from the other side of the aisle, we would hear demands for amnesty, a pathway to citizenship for people who have no business being here to begin with, who came here illegally. And the result was that nothing was done to secure the border. One of the things that I'm most excited about the big, beautiful bill that we are working on and are going to get passed next week is that finally we can fund border security and mass deportations that the American people demand without having to negotiate on amnesty. In other words, the American people get what they would like. Republicans get all of our priorities. We get a border wall, we get river barriers, we get 10,000 new ICE agents, and we don't have to deal with demands for mass amnesty. That is a huge win, not only for conservatives, but for all Americans, and I'm excited about getting that done. I believe that mass migration is the single biggest existential threat to our country today, and we're going to begin by fixing that. So thank you to the witnesses for being here. Mrs. Vaughn, I'd like to start with you. I really appreciate your time here. Some claim that in order to finally secure the border for good, we need to make a deal on amnesty or to expand our already extraordinarily generous legal immigration system or work visa programs. Does this viewpoint put the interests of the American people first?
Absolutely not. The biggest problem, well, first of all, we've tried this in the past and it never worked. It was always amnesty now, enforcement if we get around to it. And so this doesn't work. But what we do know also from experience is that every time amnesty is raised, it destroys all incentive people have to voluntarily comply with immigration laws and go home on their own if they don't have a path to legal status. It creates incentives for people to stay here illegally and incentives for people to start trying to cross the border illegally as well. We should not be discussing, contemplating an amnesty of any kind until there is integrity and enforcement of the immigration laws that we have. That's just not something that should be on the table now.
Have the American people ever been promised border security in exchange for amnesty in the past?
Oh, repeatedly, most notably in 1986, when the amnesty happened immediately, was given to more people than we were told would be qualifying for it, and the enforcement promises were never applied, never materialized. And it's been promised in a number of other types of legislation in 2013, in 2007. It's always the same thing. Amnesty now, we'll promise to give you enforcement later.
Whenever amnesty is brought up in the national conversation, have you found that it leads to increased illegal immigration?
That is definitely what happened in 2012 before the so-called Gang of Eight bill. And during that discussion, and it has happened in the past as well. In fact, well, look at what happened before the Biden administration took office. They had promised amnesty during the campaign, and the illegal crossings and encounters at the border went up even before Biden took office in January. They were up substantially in December, the month before that.
Yep. And then I'd like to ask you about our green card system. Approximately how many immigrants are approved for permanent residency each year?
It's about 1 million per year.
About 1 million. And how many of those are via chain migration?
About 60%.
60%. Awesome.
In May, not one illegal alien was released into the United States. So, Mr. Nawarsta, do you consider that to be a successful month?
Yeah.
Good. Yes. Good. I'm always looking for accommodation and comedy. So we have some comedy right there.
I think we have more than that,
So, I don't know. We'll find out. The most recent Congressional Border Security Caucus, we had the ICE director, acting ICE director, Mr. Todd Lyons, come in. Mr. Lyons was describing visa overstays. So I would ask the panel, are you all familiar with the term visa overstays, Mr. Brown? You need to answer it out loud. Yeah. This is like a court
Yes.
law. You got to answer it out loud.
Very familiar.
Okay. Mr. Nawarsta?
Yes.
Mr. Hankinson?
Yes.
And Ms. Vaughn?
Yes.
So let's talk about one visa overstay. I'm thinking of the Egyptian fellow who went on a rampage, an anti-Semitic rampage, and attacked people in Boulder, Colorado. Did you know that he was a visa overstay, Mrs. Vaughn?
Yes.
And what type of visa did he have before he overstayed?
I don't think I have seen it confirmed. I believe it was a visitor visa, B1, B2.
That's what's been reported anyways, that it was a visitor visa. And how many, Mr. Hankinson, how many visa overstays are there in the country right now, roughly?
It's
Microphone.
maybe $500,000 a year, total overstays, but not all of those are permanent. The figures are a bit difficult to parse.
Okay, so when we look at visa overstays, I want to go back here now to Mrs. Vaughn for a sec. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the architect of the 9/11 attack, said that marriage fraud is a, quote, fantastic mechanism for terrorist operatives to acquire valid documents, close quote. But rather than you, we'll go Mr. Brown. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And can you've given in your opening statement, you talked about how marriage fraud enterprises work. How would you describe DHS's process for detecting marriage fraud, Mr. Brown? Do they do that? Can they do that?
Their process is virtually non-existent. When I refer to the deliberate dismantling of anti-fraud safeguards, this is a great example. For example, under the last administration, one of the key fraud safeguards that Congress enacted in the Immigration Marriage Fraud Amendments Act of 1986 was interviews. They started waiving all the interviews. When our clients reported fraud, you know what they got back? Silence, nothing.
Yeah.
And I want to make this point. We have obtained internal data from USCIS. And from 2016 to 2019, a little subset, you know what their fraud denial rate was for the marriage-based cases? 0%, rounded to the nearest whole number. This is not accidental. Something is deeply, deeply wrong with our immigration system. And there's a lot of innocent Americans who are suffering.
Thank you for that. Mr. Hankinson, what's the process like for vetting student visa applicants?
Well, it's as good as we can make it. The interviews take just a couple of minutes, and most of the information that they provide can't be immediately verified. So we probably get it right most of the time.
So we have the acting ICE director told us the other day that in re-looking at some of these student visas, they had a student from China who was entering his 13th year of a baccalaureate degree program for a bachelor's degree. That seems, I don't know. I've put kids through college, and thank goodness none of them ever took 13 years to get through college. And if Mrs. Vaughn, if a student commits a crime or otherwise does something that would disqualify them for continuing on the student visa, how does that get reported to ICE or the school?
Well, if they are arrested for a state or local crime, ICE will get that information through the Secure Communities program, but ICE is not necessarily going to prioritize it because that, as a student visa holder, they are entitled to more due process than, for example, someone who's in the country illegally and commits the same crime.
So what the director told us is that it's not often that they're notified, and the school is rarely notified as well.
Yeah, the school wouldn't necessarily be notified.
So as my time expires, I would point out to my committee members that there's been some suggestions by Mr. Brown, Mr. Hankins, Mrs. Vaughn on some ways to fix the visa system. I think it's worth reviewing.
Do you believe the immigration system improved under the Biden administration?
Under some ways, yes, in some ways, no. So it's a very large, complex system, as you know. It's second in complexity only to the income tax.
So your colleague David Beer was here about 6 months ago, and he said, yes, the immigration system improved under the Biden administration. What's the change here of Cato's position?
So the Cato Institute doesn't have positions. The scholars of the Cato Institute do. But if you want to narrow in on the legal immigration system, then I agree with my colleague David that the legal immigration system did improve during the Biden administration. But there's large other sections of immigration that have to do with enforcement, other categories
You're going around telling people around the country here today that, hey, I'm going to split hairs, and I'm going to tell people that this one subset of immigration, hey, things are just fine in the United States of America. It's all good. When they understand this as a broader part of the immigration system as a whole, which has been a complete failure.
Well, sir, I don't work in talking points like that. I'm interested in facts, and the legal immigration system is not just fine. I've spent my career talking about how we need to expand legal immigration. So no, I don't go around saying it's just fine. I said that things have improved, and no, I don't go around
Sir,
talking
don't
and
filibuster.
talking
I got questions to ask, and I only have 5 minutes. So you're saying you're saying here vetting is effective and the visa process is secure. You stand by that, right?
Absolutely.
How did 350,000 children come into America that we have no idea where they're at the end of the Biden administration? How are there 600,000 criminal aliens in this country that committed oftentimes violent crimes, everything from attempted murder to carjacking?
The vast majority of those did not go through the legal immigration system. That is entirely the point that we are trying to make here today, is that they did not go through the legal immigration. If they did, then most of those people would have been weeded out.
This administration, which you said
This administration
did a good
or the
job in
last
some
one?
ways, the previous administration, they just let people come in without being able to get a visa. So, does your data that you purport to put out there that proves this, does it include the death of Stephen Nashwell, a truck driver in Rusk County, Wisconsin, up where I live, who left behind 3 daughters? Does that include him in the data? He's dead as a result of an illegal alien running him off the road?
The evidence that we have is
Does it include the 2 children in Abbotsford, Wisconsin?
It includes all people who are convicted of crimes in this country, sir, and all people who are arrested and all people who are incarcerated for crimes in the United States during multiple years, including the great state of Texas, which has wonderful data, the best crime data out there, confirms my research. Every death and every murder is a tragedy, and those individual criminals should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But that is not a reason to punish other people who are not criminals for that.
Are they in the data?
Of course.
Are the 100,000 children that died of or young people, #1 killer of young people in America, ages what, 21 to 45, fentanyl? Do you include the fentanyl
You mean the
deaths?
people who voluntarily took fentanyl and overdosed under that tragic situation? No, those are not homicides, sir.
Or do you mean the communist Chinese who sent the precursors over here and then the cartels?
We're talking about the drug war now? We're talking about the drug war?
And by the way, they sent it in being carried by people who are coming in with the immigration system.
Why don't you count the
are
automobiles
defending.
imported that also
But
cause
you are
car
defending.
accidents?
Have you done, in your data, have you reviewed the impact on wages for those who are in the lowest economic strata with these millions of people coming into America taking their jobs? I'll end there. Ms. Vaughn.
Of course,
Ms.
I have.
Vaughn.
Vast economic literature on
Ms.
that
Vaughn,
contradicts your statement.
share with us, has there been an impact on Americans' earnings as a result of illegal immigration?
There's no question that illegal immigration causes unfair competition, costing people job opportunities, depressing their wages, and causing those millions of Americans who've dropped out of the labor market to have trouble getting back into it. No
So
question.
it's clear they're making less money.
Yes.
And that should be included in any data set when we're considering what we should do with immigration. Is that correct?
That's the inevitable result. That's supply and demand. When you increase the supply of labor, distort the labor markets, you're going to get lower wages.
Supply and demand. You're only talking about supply. These immigrants are people who also raise money.
No. I'll direct a question to you, sir. Mr. Hank.
I'm not asking a question.
Was there a cost to the fentanyl deaths here in America?
The open border made it a lot easier to bring in a lot of drugs, and a lot of drugs killed, as you said, about 66,000 people, just fentanyl alone in 1 year.
How much do you value a life?
You can't put a price on a human life.
I yield back.
Everybody, we're back with another Intel update, one per week. This week we want to do a very special one that's focused exclusively on the bill that was passed through Congress last week, signed into law last week. That's President Trump's big BBB, the beautiful big bill that was passed in the dead of night through both the Senate and the House. We want to make sure you understand the implications for you as Michiganders, as Americans, because some of the timelines are this year. So we're going to go through the major muscle movements of this bill, help you understand how you can be prepared for what are some pretty significant changes for hundreds of thousands of Michiganders. So first, I want to start with the big muscle movement here, which is healthcare. There's no way around it. This bill does affect probably every single American's healthcare. Either you're at risk of losing your healthcare, or your healthcare is projected to get more expensive over the next couple of years. So let me walk you through it. First of all, for anyone in Michigan on the ACA or Obamacare or the marketplace, what we call the healthcare marketplace, that's 516,000 Michiganders who are on Obamacare. This program is changing. As soon as this year, November of this year, 2025, we're going to have open season again for signing up for healthcare, and you will see, many people will see increases in prices for the ACA. This disproportionately affects people who are living above the poverty line but aren't super wealthy. So imagine a family of 4 that's making $129,000 a year and you're on the ACA marketplace right now. We're projecting that your healthcare could go up by $5,500 in next year when you go to sign up. A family of 2 60-year-olds who are living in Lansing, Michigan, making $82,000 a year combined, are scheduled to have their rate go up by $13,000, a significant increase over what they've been paying for the previous year. So we put in the comments, right in the first comment, we're going to put a calculator. If you're on the ACA, you can put in how much you make, how many people in your family, and figure out how this bill is going to affect your healthcare prices. So that's the most immediate one. That's happening this year, starting in November when open season for signing up for the ACA starts again, but also once you start paying for your new plan, January 1st, 2026. So I also want to flag that there's additional barriers for people who are on the ACA, particularly when it comes to renewing your plan. Most of us are used to being on a plan and it automatically renews every year unless you go in during open season and do something about it. You do not renew your plan affirmatively. Go in and re-sign up every single year. You will be kicked off the ACA automatically. This is a really big change. This could really catch people by surprise. You know, you're going in to have a baby and suddenly you realize you didn't sign up for your insurance again. So again, every single person on the ACA should understand what this bill is going to do for you, or frankly, not do for you. Again, this is all part of the administration's long-term plan to go after the ACA. They tried to do it in President Trump's first term. They weren't successful. They found it was unpopular. Now they found different ways to attack the ACA to make fewer and fewer people sign up for the ACA. That is part of their plan, and this bill really put in black and white ways that they are attacking people on the ACA. So please understand what it means for you and your family. So another way that this plan is going to deeply affect everyone's health care is on the issue of Medicaid. Now, everyone knows the word Medicaid, but in Michigan, the plan is called the Healthy Michigan Plan. If you are on the Healthy Michigan Plan, you are on Medicaid, right? And this plan, this bill that was just signed, deeply affects your coverage. It happens over the next couple of years, January 1st, 2027. That is the deadline where all states have to be imposing additional work requirements on Medicaid recipients. Additionally, people with children that are 14 and up are going to have to be working. You know, even if childcare is still an issue, you have to be working. Those work requirements you are going to have to prove twice a year. Okay, that is a lot of work, and that is purposeful. Again, that is done so that hopefully people forget to sign up. They forget to go prove that they're working. They get too busy. They have too much going on. There is a purposeful reason that they are doing that, and that's to quietly move people off of the Michigan Healthy Families Program, as opposed to, just allowing people, again, to go a full year on that health care. So I would watch this space. The other piece of this that's going to change in 2027 is how much money our hospitals are getting in general, matching funds that our hospitals are getting in Michigan from Medicaid. Now, right now, the Michigan Hospital Association just put out a statement that we think the new bill is going to probably short Michigan $6 billion to our hospitals over the next 10 years. And that's a huge number, hard to get your head around. But I think the important thing is our hospitals are already sending out flares that they're going to have to cut back on services. They may have to close departments. And particularly for our rural communities, I'm very worried about rural hospitals potentially having to close because of those funds that won't be coming in from the federal government. So our hospital system is going to be under increasing stress in the state of Michigan, and some of them are already pretty stressed as it is. Another way that this bill affects healthcare is healthcare particularly for women and for family planning. This bill defunded Planned Parenthood, right? If folks know what Planned Parenthood is, I know it's controversial. I'm not talking about their provision of abortions. I'm talking about their provision of healthcare for women, family planning, basic gynecological exams, all kinds of other support and health care that goes to women that isn't abortion. The entire Planned Parenthood was defunded. Now it's in court, it's going back and forth, but a lot of young women in particular get basic health care from these centers across the country or across our state, and Planned Parenthood is in court right now on being defunded. Another way that this bill is going to affect our healthcare writ large in Michigan is on what are called federally qualified health centers. There are health centers all across Michigan who treat the most needy, who really depend on Medicaid dollars to exist. I visited a number of these in the past first 6 months that I've been a senator. These are places that I am really very concerned about them having to close. So just another place where people get their health care. All in all, in sum, this bill changes the face of healthcare in the state of Michigan and across the country. And of course, we know that if we have less people who are insured walking into ERs, if we have less people who are insured trying to get care when there's a car accident or they break an arm or they have to have a baby, the hospitals eat those costs. And how do they make up those costs? They charge more to people with private insurance. This is the other shoe to drop from this big bill, right? You may say to yourself, I'm not on Medicaid. I'm not on the Michigan version of Medicaid. How does this affect me? I'm not on the ACA, so how does this affect me? Well, it affects you because even if you have the best insurance in the state of Michigan, you are almost certainly going to see your prices go up starting January 1st. Because all the healthcare systems are being charged more, all the hospitals are having to cover more costs. So I would watch your bills very vigorously starting January 1st, and whether you're going to get an announcement this fall about the price of your healthcare going up. If you feel like your healthcare is going up, you shouldn't be surprised, and you should know exactly why that came to be. And I don't think there's anyone in America who feels like we are paying too little for our health care. The Trump administration purposely made all these devastating Medicaid cuts come just after the November 2026 midterm elections, right? There's big elections that month. They could flip the House, flip the Senate, and the Trump administration doesn't want the results of their policy on health care to impact their chances of winning the election in November of 2026. It's very cynical. It's done on purpose. It's meant to make you pay later, but still vote for the president's party in November of 2026. And I just want to put that out there, that they know what these Medicaid cuts, these healthcare cuts are going to do to constituents, and they don't want to pay the price for it. So had to put that out there. It's cynical, it's purposeful, and it's meant to make you vote for them now, pay later. So another big area that this bill covers and changes is SNAP, or what most people think of as food stamps. In Michigan, bridge cards. There's always been work requirements on SNAP, always, but now we extend who has to be working. So that particularly means the older set, so 54 to 64, you also have to be working 20 hours a week or 80 hours a month. And parents of children 14 to 18 also have to be working 20 hours a week, 80 hours per month. You have to prove that every single month, which is of course onerous, which is meant again to kick people off and to catch them in not re-upping their assistance. But this has big implications for food security in Michigan. Obviously, some people who are also on food stamps are also on Medicaid. So the double whammy that's happening for a lot of our most needy in the state is going to be a real factor. And this is going to start showing up in our supermarkets, in our stores like Meijer's. You're going to start to see people desperate and looking for help in some way because their assistance is maybe not there as they expected it. Another area this bill deeply affects is student loans. Now, we'll go into this more in a newsletter, but I would just say it caps student loan options. The people who are scheduled to go off to college or go off to graduate school this fall, so fall of 2025, nothing's going to change. The change is going to come in fall of 2026. So any young person who's a junior in high school right now should be thinking and understanding deeply how this bill fundamentally changes student loans in the United States. Caps Parent Plus loans at $20,000 a year. Parents were often able to help their young person out. It now caps how much help that they can give. And it also changes the amount of money you can take a loan for if you're going on to a specialty, if you're going to do grad school, if you're going to become a lawyer or a doctor. The ones we're most concerned about are on those doctors. We already have a doctor shortage across the country and in Michigan, and this bill caps the amount of money that you can take out as a loan at $200,000. Sounds huge, but the truth is medical school has become incredibly expensive. So we're already hearing from potential doctors who are saying, I'm going to hold off and see if I can afford going to school. I'm not sure I can take on all that loan debt. So that student loan situation is definitely something to watch, something to educate yourself about, and make sure you know, especially for our parents and students heading off in fall of 2026. Okay, let's talk about what this bill does on the topic of energy. It makes some pretty big decisions on the future of energy in the United States that will affect your pocketbook and will affect our national security. First and foremost, on September 30th, 2025, so this September 30th, they're going to end the EV tax credit for buying an electric vehicle. So if you were in the market to buy an electric vehicle, if that's something you were looking for, the $7,500 EV tax credit that you got when you bought an EV is ending. So I would get to a dealer as soon as possible if that's of interest to you. We are also ending the tax credits for big wind and solar projects. We had invested a lot in trying to catch up to the big dogs when it comes to alternative energy, which is China. China is just eating our lunch on investment in alternative energy. Solar, wind, they're doing more than almost all countries combined. And the United States knew that we were really far behind and we needed to catch up. So we incentivized groups to build big solar, big wind projects. And most people in Michigan know where some of these big wind and big solar projects are. Most of those projects that are in train are going to lose some of those tax incentives. Now, what that means is it's going to become much more expensive to build solar and wind and other kinds of alternative energy in the United States. It can still happen. It's just going to be much more expensive. It's going to be much more expensive to buy that energy when it comes online into our grid. So the reason why I talk about this issue as a cost issue is because when demand for energy is going up and supply is stuck down here and we're not surging supply, you know what happens. The cost of our electricity is going up and up and up, and that's only going to go up into the future because we know as a society we're just using more energy generally. Now, the reason I think of this as not only a cost issue but a national security issue is because of what China is doing. China is eating our lunch when it comes to investing in alternative energy. They're doing more than almost every country combined in wind and solar, in electric vehicle batteries, all kinds of alternative energy. And the decision in this bill was that we're okay with that. We're fine if China eats our lunch on that. We don't want to compete on those things. And instead of taking an all of the above approach, it is clear that the authors of this bill and those who voted for it, they just care about saying, well, solar and wind is woke energy, right? It's woke, so we don't like it. That's a completely boneheaded move. We want all the energy. We want all kinds of energy. We want it to be diverse. And this will leave us with either more costs or more of a risk and a gap with our competitor in China. Okay, lastly, this bill and the cuts that were in this bill were all to pay for the tax breaks also written in this bill. And it's important to realize that by far, this bill preferences the most wealthy tax brackets, period. Just to give you an example, if you make $4 million a year, you will get a tax refund of $390,000. That's just to give you a sense of, and that's a permanent tax cut. It lasts in perpetuity. Now, there were a few temporary tax cuts that were given that should help people. No tax on tips. It expires in 2028, so it's a very short-term, couple of years thing. It's not even clear exactly who will qualify, but that is something that's in this bill, and you should watch closely if you make tips. No tax on overtime. It's overtime up to $100,000. but it also expires in 2028. So it's a short-term program while the permanent tax cuts went to the most wealthy in America. Social Security is still taxed, but they're making a kind of a bonus check for those who are 65 and above for the next couple of years. That's very real, but again, just for a couple of years, unlike the permanent tax cuts, which go to the wealthiest in our country. So I wanted to give you a quick update on what we passed last week. Much of it was written in real time. Many of the senators and the congressmen who voted for this bill were voting for it without knowing what the final details actually look like. We're still combing through the 1,000+ pages to make sure we haven't missed anything since it was done in the dead of night. But we want to make sure you have what you need to understand how this bill affects you, your health care, your taxes, your food security, your energy, because those are big things that Americans care about. So for the next couple of weeks, we'll be going through what's actually in this bill.
Under election and I or Pam Bondi, the Department of Justice no longer represents the American people. I'm joined by former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance to discuss the Supreme Court, the rule of law, and what we all do to fight back. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Mark Elias. Let's get started. Joyce Vance, welcome to Defending Democracy.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, I should say welcome back. You've been on before, and you and I have done Substacks together, and I wish we were doing more of a celebration here at the end of the Supreme Court term, but I wanted to have you on to talk about where we think things go from here now that the Supreme Court has is at least taking a little bit of a break, although the shadow docket's still with us.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about some specific cases and some specific things going on since then. But I just want to get your overall impression of where we stand, at this point.
Well, I feel like the end of the term of court could have gone a lot better. Particularly disturbing to me is the DVD case that comes off of the shadow docket, where the court decides that the Trump administration can deport people who are properly deportable, don't get me wrong, but that they can deport them to third countries without any sort of due process. And this administration chose South Sudan, a country that our own State Department says Americans must not travel to because it's so dangerous. So, we live in this moment where the Supreme Court still presumes regularity and good faith from the executive branch, and I'm not seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, so I have a couple of theories here I want to sort of put on the table to have you react to. The first is, I have noticed this over the course of the last 3 terms, that we get sort of like a flurry of like not terribleness in like late May. The beginning of June. You may remember, a case you and I both followed very closely, the Alabama redistricting case. Like that came out, I forget the exact date, but it came out in that time period. Only then to have the final cases be really bad. And you mentioned the shadow docket case involving South Sudan. It was, just a month or
2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah. So what do you think?
I try to resist the temptation to believe that they sucker punch us with, these 9-0 decisions that show us their good faith and unanimity. I know that's one reason. I think, look, the case
because there was I'm sorry, I should have finished the thought. There was a flurry of
9-0s, right? Yeah.
Right.
I think it's because those cases that are easier to decide come first. Even if they're big cases, if there's unanimity astir, then they're going to come before the end. And it's these cases with dissents and concurrences that come at the last minute. People are working on them. I'm sure that there's an effort to trade votes down to the very last minute. So I don't read anything too nefarious into it. I think it just helps us understand the process.
Okay. Can you help distill for people who are not lawyers or who are lawyers but don't practice in this area? What is the state right now of due process for people that the government wants to remove from the country? Because I felt like we had a big win I can't
Me
remember
too.
which case it was a few months ago.
It was the sort of the precursor to this case, right? Where the government was trying to secret people out of the country under the dead of night, and the court said, no, there's a little bit of minimal due process here.
Right. So is that still true? Or is that less true than it was?
So I think it's less true than it was. You know, the problem is, and you know this all too well, is that when these cases come off of the shadow docket, which is normal, by the way, there's again nothing malignant at work here. This is the court's emergency docket. They use it, for instance, for death penalty cases. For other emergencies, gotta have one. But these are not cases that have been fully briefed, that have gone to oral argument, and these are not cases where we get written opinions from the court explaining its reasoning when the cases come down. So the real problem is there's an opinion, a decision made by the Supreme Court that denies these folks what I would call minimal due process before they're dumped into a third country. And we don't know why. We don't know what the reasoning is. We don't know how extensive it is. There's no guidance for the lower courts to apply. Justice Sotomayor makes that point in her dissent. And I have heard some federal judges suggesting that that's suboptimal for them. So, you know, what boggles my mind is these folks who are like, these are criminals. These are bad people. They shouldn't have due process. Well, if they don't have due process, neither do you or I, because if tomorrow morning ICE picks me up because they don't like how I look and they decide I'm not a citizen and they boot me without due process, I've got no recourse, right? And so everyone has to have that minimal opportunity to have notice and to be heard before they're departed to make sure that mistakes aren't made, like lumping me into the next group that goes to CCOT down in El Salvador.
Yeah, so I want to unpack a couple of these cases in a little more detail, but I want to start with the birthright citizenship case because
I call this the not birthright citizenship case.
Correct, because there are now two parallel things happening of really big significance within this one case, right? The first is, of course, the underlying issue of whether or not the Constitution guarantees citizenship to everyone born in the United States. I think you and I agree, I know you and I agree that the answer to that is yes. That's clear on its face, though the Supreme Court did not resolve that question, and I want to put a pin in that because that gets to the second big thing that has developed, which is the Supreme Court did use one of those cases as an opportunity to address a different issue, which is when do courts get to issue injunctions more broadly than just with respect to the individual plaintiff standing in front of them, what the court calls universal injunctions, which is actually different than nationwide injunctions, though you hear some people talking about nationwide injunctions. But essentially, the court limited the power of lower courts to issue these sort of broad sweeping injunctions. So I have a bunch of questions about what this means. But the first, as a table setting exercise, there seems to be three schools of thought as to what this means. Number one, I will call the optimist case. The optimist case, and you and I know some lawyers who have voiced this publicly, maybe you're in this camp, say, oh, this isn't that big of a deal because there is still class action as the ability to do this. There's still APA claims the ability to do this. There's representative standing, associational standing theories. And so, yeah, this is additional hoops, but the Supreme Court didn't really change that much as the practical reality. The second school says, no, this actually was a very big deal, but it's not catastrophic because the Supreme Court itself can still be the arbiter and a functionally issued nationwide injunction. This is sort of, I think, what Justice Kavanaugh was saying in his concurrence. So yeah, it's going to create a lot of mayhem at the trial court level, unclear at the Court of Appeals level, but at the Supreme Court, you'll still be able to get these sort of nationwide results. The third school of thought, which is closer to my own, is that the conservatives didn't go through all this to just leave the class action and the rest as an easy out, that there will be a lot of cases that don't fit into those kinds of broader relief, and that it is not clear that there are 5 votes on the Supreme Court on the question of whether or not even the Supreme Court rulings are binding on a universal basis. They are precedential on a universal basis, but that's different than it being a binding, essentially, injunction. So I realize that's a lot of legal jargon for the non-lawyers out there. I'm sorry, I tried to make this clear, but what do you think the Supreme Court did? What did it intend to do? And what is, most importantly, what's going to be the practical effect of this?
Yeah, I'm not sure I fit neatly into any of your three buckets. I certainly don't fit into the first bucket. You know, on the Richter scale, California girl here, I think that this is about a 7. Which is to say it's significant. I think it's a real problem. We all understand that people's views about nationwide injunctions tend to fluctuate depending on who's in the White House, right? I mean, if you're Jeff Sessions, you make that incredible comment about how can one little judge sitting on an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean change the law, for the whole nation. And I get that, truly I do. On the other hand, there are emergency situations where nationwide injunctions are extremely important to protecting rights, because when you think about injunctions, what they do is they're not usually change vehicles. They just preserve the status quo while judges can get their arms around the state of litigation and begin to make rulings. It's nothing dramatic, right? It's press the pause button for a limited period of time. So the incredible outrage that administrations of both stripes have displayed when that pause button is pressed, I think it's a little bit theatrical. Taking this away as a tool for plaintiffs' lawyers to use, you don't need to look any further than the Trump administration trying to race the clock to get people on airplanes out of the country and giving that administration the ability to maintain with a straight face until they suddenly didn't do that anymore, that once those people were delivered to El Salvador, oopsie, right, was what Bukele said on Twitter. We don't have any more control over these people. We can't do anything. You need a legal device that stops that freezes things so that something bad that can't be undone doesn't happen. And that's my real concern about ending temporary or emergency injunctions. In this particular situation, there have been plenty of cases where the Supreme Court could have decided to take that issue up and decide it. The fact that they did it in the middle of a case where the administration was displaying bad faith, was violating lower courts' orders, I think is really despicable. And it sends a real message of disjoinder to the lower federal courts from the Supreme Court, for one thing. I think it's crazy that the Supreme Court is in essence telling the administration that it can violate lower court orders so long as the Supreme Court suddenly reverses them. That seems a little bit mixed up to me. And so I think the devil here is in the details, but we can envision any number of cases coming down the road where a preliminary injunction will be needed. As you point out, cases brought under the Administrative Procedure Act, they still qualify. Cases that can be certified as a class action, they still qualify, but I don't think I can certify a class quick enough to keep that plane from taking off.
So can you say a word about that? Because I think of all of these things, the thing that has both captured most of the public attention, some of the legal attention, but which I think I am most skeptical of is the class action, the ability to get
Me too.
the class. I'm not saying that class actions can't be brought. I think that though that there
Just
are a lot
not
of ways.
quickly, right?
Right, exactly. It's the speed, and also, this court has been hostile to class actions in the consumer space, and so I'm not sure where that how that ultimately shakes out. I'm just curious if you share that that intuition.
My class action expertise comes primarily from civil rights cases. I've done some commercial work too, but getting a 23B2 class certified, which is what we're talking about in these settings, it's not easy. For one thing, you've got to figure out who's in your class, right? And then you have to convince a federal judge that there are common or typical claims, that there's adequate representation. I'm leaving out the first factor, which for some reason I can't pull out of my brain, but there's one more. And usually going through that class certification process, that takes a hearing or two. It takes the judge some time to noodle the situation and think about it. That's not to say it couldn't be done more quickly, but I don't think that there's any reason to believe that it will be, especially, if you're legal learned at the ACLU, scrambling to figure out how to get this bad thing to stop. You certainly can't do it in a couple of hours in the middle of the night. So, yeah, I'm real skeptical of that one. Also, as you say, there's some antagonism towards that mechanism in both the lower courts and at the Supreme Court.
I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Joyce Vance in a moment. But, in 2020, I founded Democracy Docket to track the voting and election cases that are most important nationwide. And as Donald Trump and the Republicans attack free and fair elections ahead of 2026, that mission is more important than ever before. That's why the Democracy Docket team is rapidly growing now with more than 20 people. It is supporting their work that is so critical to making sure that you stay informed. And the best way to do that, by becoming a premium member now at the link above or in the description below. So you, in addition to having done a lot of civil rights work, and I want to talk to you about a couple of voting cases, including what's going on in the Supreme Court with the Louisiana case. But before we get to that, you were a federal prosecutor, you were U.S. attorney, so you have a lot of experience in that arena. And why do they feel the need to get these people out so quickly? Like, I was really struck that, on July 4th, literally on July 4th, they were saying we have a plane to take these folks to South Sudan at basically 7 p.m. East Coast time. Now, I was thinking, like, just in a political lens, because my background is in Democratic politics and representing campaigns, like, the optics of doing this on July 4th are terrible for the administration. But it feels like, beyond that, we are constantly in this game of like cat and mouse in which Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, and Kristi Noem, the head of DHS, the agencies they run seem to be in like an urgent need, according to them, to do these deportations. Am I missing something in the process that is required that these be done on these sort of very tight, inflexible time frames? Or is this just like a plane taking off?
Well, I mean, for one thing, right, these folks are afraid that if a court can sink its teeth into the case before they act, the court will stop them from doing it.
Right, but that's not a legitimate, they're not going to tell that to a judge, right? Like, what's their stated reason?
You asked for reasons, not for legitimate reasons. Look, let me tell you the sad truth. I live in Alabama, as you well know. These are not bad things that this administration is doing. This is what I've, not me personally, right? Folks who are Trump supporters in the base, in MAGA, they're excited. They are cheering them on. They want them to outsmart the courts, outsmart those damn plaintiffs' lawyers, and get these bad, evil criminals out of the United States. And so, in essence, this is feeding the political bulldog. It's not an exercise in truth and justice. It's not an exercise in the law and the facts. And I think that's what's so very troubling to me, having served at the Justice Department for 25 years. You don't do the president's bidding. You pursue your cases based on the law and the facts. And yet we've recently seen lawyers fired from the Justice Department for telling judges the truth when they are asked questions. It's clear that this is not a Justice Department that's concerned with the truth. It's not a presidency that's concerned with the truth. It's just in every way the upside down, right? Instead of doing justice, we now do bad things that make our base happy with us. And of course, the base has been kept in the dark about the impact of this. And we're starting to see that now as people say, well, I voted for Trump, but I didn't think that they were going to deport my wife, or I didn't think that they were going to deport me. I thought they were just going to take the bad people. The truth is, whoever the administration includes in that grouping, the bad people, now has no rights.
So I want to ask you about another one of these deportation or immigration cases, and that is what seems to now be turning into a Kafkaesque novel involving Gilmore Obrego Garcia. For people who don't remember, this is the Maryland man who was deported to El Salvador in violation of a administrative judge's order that said he was deportable, but he was not deportable to El Salvador. He was then sent to El Salvador, We then spent several weeks in which the administration, including a cameo by the president of El Salvador in the Oval Office, sort of yucked it up that this guy was never coming back, predicted he'd never come back. Senator Van Hollen from Maryland went down and visited with him. This eventually, I think, public sentiment, much to the surprise of conservatives and Republicans, actually turned against the president on this. This seemed, in many people's eyes, unnecessarily cruel. And then all of a sudden, he was, in fact, brought back to the United States, only for us to find out that he had been indicted in, I think, Tennessee. Yeah, where he is facing charges. There was a lot of commentary about those charges and, some deals that were made with people to testify against him. But then in the middle of this then took sort of another turn, which is that I guess the administration now wants to deport him to another country. And a judge in Maryland wound up holding a hearing to try, on the motion to dismiss the indictment?
There's a motion to dismiss and a motion to amend.
Okay. So tell us what on earth is going on.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? There are two separate cases. There's the civil case in Maryland in front of Judge Policinas, filed by Abrego Garcia's wife in her name and his name. And that was the original civil case she filed, Please Bring Me Back, right? And so there's that case. And then there's the criminal case where he stands indicted essentially on charges of human smuggling in Nashville. And most of the theatrics this week happened in Maryland in the civil case because Abrego Garcia's lawyers file a motion to amend the case. He's still in custody in Nashville. He'll be there until July 16 because although the judge ruled that it was fair game to release him, they didn't release him out of fear that the government would pick him up immediately and deport him again. So that's all ass backwards, pardon my French.
So he doesn't want to be released?
Out of fear that he'll be deported. So in Maryland, the judge is also considering what relief can she offer? Can she order them to bring him back to Maryland? Can she order them not to deport him? Because, the Supreme Court's decision and her earlier decision is essentially restore him to his status quo, which was being in Maryland under ICE supervision there, not being sent off to South Sudan or someplace like that. And it's clear, by the way, that the administration is not thinking about what the law says or what the facts of the case are. They are focused only on making up to the audience of one, right? To Donald Trump, who now hates this guy and wants him deported in an irrational way that doesn't comport with our traditional sense of law and justice. But what happens in the civil case is there's a hearing, the government brings in a lawyer, she's a ringer. I think she's a 2023 law school graduate. No, I'm sorry, I think it's earlier than that. I think she's been practicing for 5 or 7 years, working for the Attorney General's office in Florida. So Pam Bondi was her boss before. Now she's her boss again. Not somebody with expertise as a federal prosecutor. She's been at DOJ for a couple of months at best. She walks into the court and maintains that the deportation of Abrego Garcia was an isolated mistake. And that contradicts what the government has been saying for these many months. No, we were entitled to deport him. No, there's no mistake here for us to fix. They've gone back and forth a little bit. But she came out with isolated incident. Judge, you don't have to worry about this happening again, so there's no need to offer any relief. This case is moot. He's been returned. All should be forgiven. And the judge, pretty much goes ballistic and says, I don't believe you. There's a suggestion in the other case that as soon as he's released, you'll deport him to a third country. What does your client intend to do? And the lawyer for the government says, oh, I don't know. We don't have to worry about that till he's back in our custody. He's in Nashville right now, not in ICE custody. So we just don't know. And so the upshot of that is that there will be a hearing on Thursday where Judge Zenas has asked the government to bring forward a witness who can tell her under oath what the government's plans are.
So I don't mean to be skeptical of the courts here because we need to rely on them, but I feel like we have seen this story before, like not just in the immigration context, but like judges get frustrated. The Department of Justice lawyers seem to be not telling the truth or not knowing the truth. the judges say, well, then I need an affidavit or a status report by this time, or I need a witness, or you get to depose, they're going to get to depose a witness and they have to answer questions. But then, like, at the end of the day, like, how does this end? Like, I mean, do you think that in the end, this ends well for Mr. Garcia, or does the government just hold so many cards here that, like, the judges can only do what they can do?
I just don't see how this ends well for him because of the animosity Trump and probably Stephen Miller have towards him. Look, the reality is he is a deportable alien who is here without legal immigration status. Whether we like it or not, that's the rule. There is an order of withholding that says he cannot be returned to El Salvador, his home country, because the reason he came to this country in the first place was gang persecution. Now, why there wasn't an intervening asylum request, I don't know. That would have been his best path, but apparently that didn't happen. And so the government could, particularly under this new ruling we were just talking about in the third party case, they could absolutely deport him to a third country. And I think my fear would be, if I were his lawyer, that they would deport him to the most punitive place that they could think of for him personally, just given the way that they're conducting these cases, not in good faith. That may give certainly the district judge some latitude, right, when she enters her order. The problem is ultimately if Abrego Garcia wins in the lower courts, even if he wins in the Fourth Circuit again, this goes back to the Supreme Court.
All right, speaking of the Supreme Court, I said I wanted to cover with you a case that is very much in your wheelhouse and in mine, which is this case out of Louisiana. And so for people who have not been following every twist and turn in this, the state of Louisiana, like the state of Alabama, drew new maps like every state, after the 2020 census. But in both of those states, they created one Black Opportunity District each. And in both of those instances, they were sued. In both of those instances, they lost and were told there needed to be 2 Black Opportunity Districts. The Alabama case then went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court affirmed the lower court decision. There are now 2 Black Opportunity Districts in the state of Alabama. The Louisiana case also went to the Supreme Court, but without hearing, it essentially got summarily affirmed. But then a group of white plaintiffs challenged the Louisiana map, saying, okay, your creation of these 2 Black Opportunity Districts was race conscious. We think that violates the U.S. Constitution's prohibition against the use of race as a predominant factor in redistricting, and therefore we want this undone. The case got briefed and argued. We get to the last day of the term. We're all sitting, we're hitting refresh, and lo and behold, I remember texting with people. I'm like, oh, the Chief Justice must have this case, because he is literally the only person left who could be issuing a decision. They issue decisions in reverse order of seniority, and the chief always goes last. And then lo and behold, we're told the case is being held over and going to be re-argued, rebriefed, and potentially the questions presented expanded or changed in some form or fashion. And we are, as we're recording this, still waiting to hear from the Supreme Court on exactly what they have in mind. But my own view is whatever they have in mind is not good. So what do you make of this, and what do you think they have in mind?
Well, I mean, let me ask you the question. I think you know better than I do. You know, that Alabama case is still percolating. The state legislature actually engaged in outright defiance of the Supreme Court's order when the case came back on remand, refused to do what they were told to do. Ultimately, it was done. We voted with those 2 Black Opportunity Districts. Alabama elected its 2nd Black member of Congress. First time we've had 2 in the House. But that case is percolating again.
Yeah, that's right.
And I wonder what you think about the notion that the Supreme Court may see that coming and maybe wanting to join those 2 cases and decide them together. That may give them a basis for ruling more broadly, as you say, in ways that will make both of us very unhappy. But do you think that that might be what's coming here?
I think it's possible. I think that they may just want to rule more broadly anyway. I mean, the last time I remember this happening, particularly last time in an election case, was Citizens United, where the case got briefed and argued on a relatively narrow question of campaign finance law, which was whether pay-per-view movies were subject to the prohibition on electioneering communications. Case got briefed and argued. The Supreme Court decided at the end of the term, nope, we wanted argued on a broader question, a question that the parties hadn't raised, which was whether the ban on corporate independent expenditures in its entirety needed to fall. And of course it did. And so my fear is that essentially they want to know, they're going to ask whether that the Voting Rights Act Section 2, which is the part we're talking about, is simply inconsistent with the 14th Amendment. And that will be the question that is required to be re-argued, regardless of whether it's just the Louisiana case or the Louisiana-Alabama case. That would be a blockbuster of a decision.
I feel like Citizens United is the model. In Citizens United, they're like, oh, wait, we could make this so much better for Republicans. Let's just reissue what the basis for the decision is going to be. That was just unbelievably bizarre when that whole situation shook out. This one maybe feels in some ways less dramatic, but the results will be as long-reaching, because if ultimately the court says that you can't take into account that a state acted in a deliberately racially discriminatory manner when it drew its districts, then boy, that makes your job a lot more difficult, doesn't it, Mark?
It sure does. So in the few remaining moments I have with you, I want to ask you a question that I've listened to. I read your Substack. I watch a lot of your videos that you record. And I've never heard you address this, but you addressed this with me like months and months ago in a conversation that you and I participated in that was not online. So hopefully you won't mind me now prompting you to have this conversation in public. And that is, you were a pioneer in the use of, whether you call it new media, independent media, Substack, whatever it is. You were someone who very early on understood the power of being able to provide more in-depth news, opinion, analysis, in an area that you are deeply expert, and you grew an enormous following, and it continues to grow. And I am just curious, now here we are, where there are lots and lots more entrants. And I think the conversation you and I had was actually, you were like, I think you were predicting this is not as easy as a lot of people think it is the conversation that you and I are having. And I'm just curious what you make of the moment that we are in terms of media coverage, legal news coverage, newsletters, whatever it is. I'm just curious what you think. Are we in the first inning, the ninth inning? Is it getting easier? Is it getting harder? Do you think it's getting better or worse? What do you think?
So for one thing, you're giving me way too much credit for appreciating what the changes were. I mean, literally, and I think I may have told you this, I was sitting around with two of my girlfriends, Mary Trump and E. Jean Carroll. They were both writing Substacks, and they were like, you should do this too. And, I'm an appellate lawyer by trade. I spent my time as a trial lawyer, and then I spent a lot of time as an appellate lawyer. I like to write. And I thought, I can maybe explain some legal stuff or some things about how DOJ works, and maybe like 20 people will read this. So I didn't envision that I would end up with just like a crazy big number of people reading my Substack every night. But I still just try to do that basic thing and be an explainer. When I started, there weren't, maybe a half a dozen people who were writing in that area. And now there's just tons, and everybody is writing, and it can feel overwhelming. And the reality is, and I think that this is the point of your question, some of that writing is just extraordinary. My former DOJ colleague, Jonathan Wroblewski, writes a Substack on sentencing law. And if you're a criminal sentencing law geek, and I unapologetically am, then Jonathan's Substack will be your cup of tea, and you will be delighted to have it at your disposal. The real question isn't how do you find specialty information like that. The question is, how do we take in our news overall? Cable TV seems to be waning and far less trusted. Newspapers are having their own set of issues. Substack, YouTube, even, people going live on Instagram, where I used to post pictures of my knitting with my other knitting friends, and now we're all doing politics on Instagram. And so the question, I think, is a question of how do we, as high information voters, as intelligent, sophisticated people, how do we protect ourselves from disinformation? How do we decide what's worthy of our time? Because there's too much, you can't follow everything. What are we supposed to do if we want to be responsible citizens? And I think that answer is going to be very individualized. But what I always say to people when they ask this question is, find somebody you trust and read them. And maybe try to read some views that are different from your own too, right? I mean, if all you do is expose yourself to your bubble, well, you're not being very thoughtful. You really want, I watch Fox News now and then. It's hard for me, but I want to make sure that I'm not being too one-sided. I want to make sure that I'm considering all viewpoints before I decide on my own. When it comes to, obviously I subscribe and read Democracy Docket because I care about voting issues. And I feel like you're the place to go to for voting news. And then there are folks that I go to for generalized news too. Our friends Jen Rubin and Norm Eisen at The Contrarian publish a lot of articles, including on culture and art. And in some ways, to me, that starts to supplement newspapers. Maybe the last thing I'll say is, I am not a fan of urging the demise of our traditional sources of news. I feel like the result in the 2020 election rested in large part on information that we got from newspapers and television and online sources. And what we should do is work to strengthen all of those sources for delivery of reliable news, not kill off any of them. But what we need to do as Americans is to become better educated, more discerning about news, and asking these sort of basic questions. There's a program in Finland where they've trained their kids to be good consumers of information. Yeah. Who's writing this? Why are they writing this? When did they write it? What's their background? Is somebody paying them? Does it make sense to you? And so instead of just reading headlines and going, oh my God, there are Jews with space lasers, people need to think for themselves. And that feels very basic and at the same time very important.
Well, Joyce Vance, I always read your Substack, and I recommend it to everyone. Anyone who's listening here, we will put a link, or watching here, we'll put a link to Joyce's Substack publication. It is really an essential read to understand what is happening in court, what's happening to democracy, what's happening in the legal system. And it is not just really informative. She is a delightful writer. So you're going to love reading it. If you like to read, you're going to love her Substack. So we'll link to that. And Joyce Vance, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I always appreciate spending time with you.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Defending Democracy. Please make sure you're subscribed to this YouTube channel by pressing the button right in front of you. And also subscribe to Democracy Docket's newsletters to stay informed on the latest voting rights and democracy news.
Good afternoon, everyone. Please allow me to thank the press for being here today. This is a very important press event, and it's exceedingly important that we get a message to the masses about some issues of grave and great concern. Let me start, however, by expressing my condolences and my concerns with what's happening with the Guadalupe flooding. People have lost their lives. This is a crisis. It is something that I believe we will have to address in the near future. I think that, unfortunately, the President of the United States some time ago made it possible, whether he liked it or not, to address these concerns immediately after they occur. You might recall that there was an airplane helicopter collision in Washington, D.C., and immediately thereafter, the president concluded that it had something to do with equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I didn't think so. There wasn't a scintilla of evidence. But I think that you're going to find that there are going to be people who are going to want to know what happened with the flooding and why so many people have lost their lives and whether it could have been prevented. To this end, I have sent a letter along with many of my colleagues, to the Chair of Homeland Security. We indicate our concerns about the occurrence and the role that the federal government may have played by and through the president, who has said that he no longer desires to have FEMA take the lead in helping us with these catastrophes. Now, having said that, I want to tell you that this is in part reason why people don't want Al Green in Congress. Because I know not only speak truth to power, I speak truth about power. We are about to see another Uvalde-style cover-up as it relates to Kerr County and the flood event. This Uvalde-style cover-up, you might recall, occurred when some 19 babies were murdered at a school, and the governor did very little about it, nothing as it relates to gun safety, and very little to protect children. I speak truth to power, and I believe that while some people